Chapter 734. The man said, "Let's make a deal. If I put it away, you can't hit me. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. All right. If I put it away, you have to put away too, okay?" Lei Xingfeng said angrily, "You're so annoying. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Hurry up, hurry up. I promise I won't hit you." The man had no choice but to put his real body away and reveal his true form. He was a skinny middle-aged man with a mustache and a wretched look. Lei Xingfeng smiled and stared at him. The man was so scared that he shouted, Hey, do you mean what you say? Put your real body away. What are you going to do?" Lei Xingfeng waved his hand. The palm cut through the air and made a sharp sound. The man was so scared that he shrank his neck and sat on the ground. He said, "Unlucky." Lei Xingfeng thought about it and put his real body away. He walked to the man and said, "Who are you?" The man looked at Lei Xingfeng in surprise because Lei Xingfeng looked so young. He was shocked. How could this little guy be so strong? He said, I'm Ah Zhang. I just came to the big crack." Lei Xingfeng said, "Why are you scolding me?" The man smiled bitterly. "I'm not scolding you. I'm just stopping you from destroying the big crack." Lei Xingfeng said, "When did I destroy the big crack?" The man pointed at the big pit on the ground and said, "Isn't that the big crack?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and scolded, "You idiot, don't you know? I didn't collapse the ground. It's just a pit. It will be full of plants soon. Are you new?" Ma Zhang said, Yes, it's my first time here." Lei Xingfeng said, "No wonder. Since you're new, you have to follow the rules. You don't know anything, and you dare to talk nonsense. It's normal to be beaten up." He began to lecture the man without holding back. He looked like he was the boss, and scolding him was for his own good. Ma Zhang stupidly said, I heard this place." Lei Xingfeng said, "What I heard doesn't count." This guy was bullied by Lei Xingfeng to the point of tears. He said, I heard." Lei Xingfeng interrupted him and said, "What I heard doesn't count." Ma Zhang argued, "But I've never been here before, so of course I've only heard about it." Lei Xingfeng slapped him on the head and said, "You're still trying to quibble. You're already looking for death when you first came to the big crack. You're lucky you met me. If you met an outsider or a star beast, you'd be dead. They won't listen to hear." This fellow's strength was at the beginner level of a monarch, which was the basic strength for those who entered the big crack. Ma Zhang was suppressed by Exine Foam to the point that he didn't have any temper. He spoke, All right, it's my fault. Lei Xingfeng was having a great time bullying him, but when he thought about how he was in front of Xingfeng, he didn't feel like bullying him anymore. Lei Xingfeng waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I just wanted to test my skills. I've just advanced, so I'm not sure about my strength. Since you're here, it's not a bad idea to have a fight. Although you're weak, forget it. There's nothing to be happy about bullying you." Ma Zhang's face turned bitter. He really asked for it. Why did he come here for no reason? If he wanted to test his skills, then so be it. Even if the big crack collapsed, what did it have to do with him? He was so unlucky that he came looking for trouble. He was lucky that he didn't get beaten to death. It wasn't easy to meet someone weaker than him. Lei Xingfeng didn't want to let him go. He smiled and said, "You came here alone? Come and sit. Since we're not fighting, you're not an outsider or a star beast, and we don't have any big grudges. We're all humans, so there's nothing we can't talk about." Ma Zhang saw Lei Xingfeng being polite and relaxed. If Lei Xingfeng kept bullying him, he wouldn't be able to stand it. After all, he was also a high-ranking person in his hometown. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to bully him. Just meeting him once was a great honor. His status was very high. Every cultivator who could come here was an indisputable expert in their hometown. If they weren't experts, they wouldn't be able to come to the big crack. Of course, Wu Yang and the rest were exceptions. They entered with the help of the Mirror Realm. Ma Zhang sat 2 meters away from Lei Xingfeng. He said, "I came here alone. I heard from my seniors that this place is rich in the materials we need. That's why I came." Lei Xingfeng said, "How long did it take you to get here?" Ma Zhang said, "A long time. I thought it was very close, but I ended up running through countless continents. If I didn't have the exact location, I doubt I could find this place." Lei Xingfeng said, "This place is very remote. Why did you come here?" Ma Zhang said, "I've been running around since I entered the big crack. I heard, I really heard that there's a human gathering place, but I couldn't find it, so I had to run around. Lei Xingfeng said, "You're lucky. If you ran into a place controlled by outsiders, you wouldn't be able to run away. I was besieged by outsiders in groups. They seem to have more experts than us." Mahjong said, "I know that. I heard that the experts of the outsiders are ranked first in the big crack. We humans are ranked second. We have the least number of star beasts, ranked third. The main reason is that both outsiders and humans hunt star beasts. Killing a human or an outsider wouldn't yield anything. However, killing a star beast was completely different. It was a moving material warehouse. As long as one killed a star beast, one could collect a large amount of materials. Therefore, star beasts were the prey." Lei Xingfeng said, "I haven't seen a single star beast until now. They're too good at hiding." Mahjong said, "You're a senior who came here first. How can you not know this?" Lei Xingfeng realized that he was being looked down upon. He said, "Know what? Don't tell me you heard." Mahjong said, "I've heard. Well, I've really heard that star beasts live on the edge of the Great Spatial Rift. They rarely enter the Great Spatial Rift, but if they do, they usually come in groups." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, I heard it again, but it seems to make sense." Mahjong said, "Although it's my first time here and I've only been here for a few days, we have an old senior who knows a lot about this place. I heard it all from him." Lei Xingfeng said, "No wonder you kept saying you heard it. Okay, where do you plan to go?" Mahjong said, "I want to go to the human gathering place. I roughly know the location, but after I came in, I got lost and couldn't find it." He laughed awkwardly and said, "I won't go in the wrong direction, but I often go in the wrong direction. I have no sense of direction. Moreover, there's no road here." Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but laugh. In fact, he was also a little bad with directions. However, because of the mirror realm in this life, there were various coordinates at the secret door. So even if he went in the wrong direction, it was no big deal. He could just start again. Mahjong said, "I knew you would laugh. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Laugh all you want." Lei Xingfeng laughed. "The reason I'm laughing is because I have no sense of direction. Haha." Mahjong was instantly amused. This guy had a strong self-esteem. After hearing Lei Xingfeng's words, he didn't have any resentment. So he was also bad with directions. He was probably laughing at someone who was like him. "Let me tell you a secret." Mahjong felt that the other party didn't look down on him, so he told a secret. Lei Xingfeng said, "What secret?" Mahjong said, "The big crack leads to a mysterious place. Do you know?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Fantasy Sky Realm?" Mahjong said in surprise, "How do you know?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Why don't I know? The Fantasy Sky Realm is open for a time limit. Also, you don't have the key to enter the Fantasy Sky Realm. Even if it opens, you can't enter." Mahjong said, "Key? What key?" "As far as I know, once the Fantasy Sky Realm opens, as long as someone enters, they can break in after a period of time." Lei Xingfeng didn't know this. He said, "How do I break in?" Mahjong suddenly became complacent. He said, "You don't know. Haha, let me tell you. Only a few people know this." Lei Xingfeng raised his hand and slapped his head. He said, "Shut up. If you have something to say, say it. Don't talk nonsense." Mahjong shrunk his neck and said, "Be patient. Okay, I'll say it. Seeing Lei Xingfeng raise his hand again, he had to give in. He was not afraid of being hurt, but it was too embarrassing. Fortunately, there was no one else here. He said, "The reason why the Fantasy Sky Realm is called that is because there is a natural large-scale illusion restriction. As for how it is formed, I don't know, but I heard it is very powerful." Don't hit me. Seeing Lei Xingfeng raise his hand again, Mahjong had to speed up his speech. He felt wronged because he thought he had spoken very quickly and clearly. He didn't talk nonsense. When the first batch of people enter, the entire illusion restriction will be activated, and there will be loopholes in the outer restriction. Others can break in. Lei Xingfeng was proficient in restriction. He spat and said, "Nonsense. How can there be such a restriction?" Mahjong said, "You don't know anything about restriction. How do you know there is no such restriction?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't know anything about restriction. I am a restriction grandmaster." Mahjong said, "Don't talk nonsense. You are a restriction master. I don't believe it. Are you kidding me? Lei Xingfeng raised his hand and slapped him. He said, You are the one who is kidding. Do I need you to admit whether I am a restriction master or not? Why would I lie to you? You're not a child. Ma Zhang covered his head and said, Hey, don't hit me. I'm also a master. Xian Feng didn't even care about his protests. Raising his hand a few more times, he spoke, I'm not hitting you. I'm just reminding you not to spout nonsense. Chapter 735. Encountering such an unreasonable guy, Ma Zhang couldn't do anything. Protesting was useless, and he couldn't beat him in a fight. Besides, being hit a few times wouldn't hurt him, and he wouldn't even feel pain. However, he still felt very aggrieved. Ma Zhang said, I'm not spouting nonsense. How many experts are restriction masters? Lei Xingfeng said, I am. Ma Zhang was also stubborn. He said, I don't believe it. Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, All right, since that's the case, I'll show you. Ma Zhang said, Show what? These are puppets. More than 10 steel puppets appeared, and then quickly spread out. In less than 10 seconds, these steel puppets had already stood in their designated positions. In an instant, the thunder-killing array was in place. Lei Xingfeng's face revealed a smile. Seeing the smile on Xian Feng's face, Ma Zhang suddenly had a bad feeling. He spoke, This is a doll, not a restriction. I know some restrictions too. Lei Xingfeng said, Is that so? Hee hee. This laughter immediately made Ma Zhang's whole body numb. This feeling was absolutely terrifying. He said this. Ouch. Just as Ma Zhang said this, a thick thunderbolt appeared out of thin air and directly struck him, causing him to cry out in pain. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, Am I a restriction master? A large amount of thunder and lightning, following his words, crazily bombarded. In fact, Lei Xingfeng knew that this active restriction thunder-killing array wasn't very powerful. It was difficult to deal with Dao Lords, let alone Emperor stage experts. At most, it could only numb them for a while. This kind of restriction thunder-killing array wasn't lethal to his real body. Of course, Lei Xingfeng didn't intend to hurt him. He just wanted to let him know that he was a restriction master. Ma Zhang was nervous at first, but after the continuous bombardment of thunder and lightning, he calmed down because this level of attack didn't hurt him at all. He quickly rushed out of the thunder-killing array and said, I believe you. I believe you. He wasn't afraid of this thunder-killing array, but he was afraid that Lei Xingfeng would take out even more powerful restrictions. Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, Unfortunately, this is a mobile restriction killing array that I made a long time ago. If I make a restriction killing array now, I believe that you will suffer a little. Ma Zhang was shocked. He didn't expect Lei Xingfeng to be a restriction master, and not bad at that. At least, he had never seen an active restriction before. This time he believed him. Lei Xingfeng kept the steel doll. He was only left with this lightning-killing array. The others were all destroyed. Plus, he wasn't satisfied with this set of restrictions. It was too weak. Not to mention Emperor stage experts. Even if he met Dao Lord stage cultivators, this thunder-killing array wouldn't be able to handle them. As his strength increased and his understanding of restrictions deepened, this thunder-killing array was just a commemorative item. If Lei Xingfeng made a similar killing array again, he would need more advanced materials. With his current level, he could make a killing array that could threaten Emperor stage experts. Ma Zhang said, Since you know restrictions so well, I heard that you can enter the fantasy sky realm. Is that false? Lei Xingfeng said, That might not be the case. When it comes to natural restrictions, I can't be sure. Ma Zhang slapped his thigh and said, You see, even you don't know. How can you deny it? Lei Xingfeng said, I can't be sure. As far as I know, there isn't any restriction like this. Ma Zhang said, I don't know about this either. However, I heard it from Senior. I believe him. Until now, what he said is correct. Lei Xingfeng said, All right, I'm a little curious. What is this fantasy sky realm? Ma Zhang said, Actually, I'm not very clear about it either. However, I know that there are really high-level materials inside. No, it can't be called materials. To be precise, it should be strange items. There are all kinds of strange items in the fantasy sky realm. As long as you can find a strange item with the same attribute, your seal will be greatly improved. Lei Xingfeng said, strange items are produced there? Ma Zhang said, this is only one of the benefits. There are other benefits, but I don't know much about them. Lei Xingfeng secretly shook his head. It seemed that it was a pity that he didn't go in with Xingfeng. However, if he could choose again, he would still choose to go home. This would never change. Ma Zhang said, you are proficient in restrictions. It should be easier for you to go in. As he spoke, he suddenly thought of a question and said, all right, what's your name? This guy was really muddle-headed. After talking for so long, he still didn't know Lei Xingfeng's name. Lei Xingfeng said, Lei Xingfeng, you can call me a phone. Ma Zhang nodded and said, okay, a phone. Do you want to go and test it out? I know the exact location. However, this place is a little strange. Once you enter the big crack, you can't use the secret door. I can only run around and get lost. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, indeed, there is a trick to using the secret door here. If you don't know, you won't be able to open it. Ma Zhang was surprised and said, there's such a thing. How do I open it? Lei Xingfeng pointed out, and Ma Zhang immediately understood. He said, okay, I'll take you there. Ma Zhang opened the secret door and led Lei Xingfeng directly. If they flew, it would be dangerous. Who knew what they would encounter? If they could use the secret door, it would be fine. In fact, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't use the secret door like this before. He only understood this after he gained control of the mirror realm. If he had understood this before, he would have been able to escape when he was besieged last time. In an instant, Lei Xingfeng followed Ma Zhang out of the secret door. There was no land in sight, and the surroundings were hazy. Ma Zhang was dumbfounded and said, this is bad. What the hell is this place? There's fog everywhere. How do we go? But in Xian Feng's eyes, this place was completely different. He saw the densely packed restriction nodes, and after observing for a bit, he knew that this was a restriction even stronger than a hallucinatory restriction. It was a very terrifying restriction. The moment he touched a restriction node, he would immediately be lost inside. He guessed that only by opening a secret door would he be able to leave. It was a very scary restriction. Lei Xingfeng habitually began to learn this restriction and analyze its combination structure. Ma Zhang saw Lei Xingfeng hovering and said, how do we get out? Hey, what's wrong with your eyes? Lei Xingfeng's eyes were emitting silver light. He shook his head and looked around. Hearing this, he said, don't move. There are restrictions all around. Ma Zhang was so scared that he didn't dare to move. He said, really? There are restrictions all around? Lei Xingfeng said, don't move. If you touch a restriction, you will really get lost. I don't know if the restriction here is to prevent the secret door from opening. Once the restriction is opened, you won't be able to get out. Ma Zhang was so scared that he didn't dare to move. He froze in the air and said, why is it so scary? Lei Xingfeng said, this thing is not scary. What's scary is that if there is a natural killing matrix, then we will be finished. As for now, I can still deal with it. This was the advantage of having a restriction master. Ma Zhang now understood how important a restriction master was. If he came in here, he would really lose a layer of skin, even if he didn't die. Who knew that this place was full of restrictions? He said, okay, I won't move. I really won't move. I will listen to you. Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, don't be so nervous. Although the restrictions here are very dense, I can still find a way out. Don't worry. He wasn't bragging. As long as he didn't touch a restriction, the whole restriction was like an empty shell. There would be no danger. Ma Zhang said very honestly, I will listen to you. He had to be honest. His understanding of restrictions was only at the preliminary level. This was something that every cultivator had to master. He didn't know anything about more advanced restrictions. Lei Xingfeng said, come here and follow me. Follow me wherever I fly. Don't touch anything and don't launch any attacks. Understand? Ma Zhang said, yes, I understand. He flew behind Lei Xingfeng in fear and said, okay, I am ready. Lei Xingfeng said, by the way, which direction should we go? Ma Zhang was suddenly stunned. He said this? Who knows? Lei Xingfeng said, you don't know? Mahjong thought for a while and said, "Oh, right down. I remember now. I heard that we can only find the way down." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, let's go down. Let's see what's down there. Follow me and don't fall behind." Mahjong said, "Got it. You fly first." Lei Xingfeng once again identified the restriction nodes below. He found that the restriction nodes below were quite sparse. If they were lucky, they wouldn't touch a large number of restrictions. If they were fast, they might be able to break through the restrictions here. Of course, if Lei Xingfeng went over, he wouldn't touch a single restriction node. This was because he could clearly see the location of the restriction nodes. He could completely avoid them. Carrying Mahjong, he circled left and right and gradually descended. Lei Xingfeng stopped from time to time and hovered in the air. Mahjong didn't know anything and naturally didn't dare to speak. When Lei Xingfeng stopped, he stopped. When Lei Xingfeng told him to go, he followed. He was very obedient. As for Lei Xingfeng, it wasn't for no reason. When he found a new restriction, he would study it. This was also an opportunity. It wasn't always possible to see high-level restrictions. It took more than half a day to descend more than 10,000 meters. The restrictions here made Lei Xingfeng gasp in amazement. There were all kinds of restrictions. At the same time, Lei Xingfeng also found a secret. The coordinates of Mahjong's secret door were very accurate. If one forced their way down and moved fast enough, it wouldn't be dangerous even if they touched the restriction because they would have already passed through it. The person who found this location must be a restriction expert. In the process of descending, Lei Xingfeng found at least 3 types of restrictions. One was a killing formation, one was a conversion formation, and one was a variant illusion formation. Mahjong said, "I think I can see the land below." Chapter 736. Lei Xingfeng said, "I know we're almost there. There's still a restriction here. I need to see it clearly. Stay where you are and don't move. I'll be back after taking a look." Mahjong was about to cry. He said, "You have to be faster. Otherwise I... He wanted to say that he was scared, but he couldn't say it. It was too embarrassing. Lei Xingfeng said, don't worry. Just wait." Lei Xingfeng quickly landed on the ground. Only then did he discover a small empty space. This was a small empty space without any restriction. There were restriction nodes around it, and it wasn't an illusion restriction. It was a killing formation. It was a very powerful restriction. Even if a monarch rank expert touched this restriction, he or she would definitely be in a difficult situation. Whether or not they could break out was another matter. However, once they touched the restriction, they would quickly lose this empty space. The restriction that Lei Xingfeng wanted to see was this killing formation. This was also a naturally formed killing formation. Lei Xingfeng had to admit that this world was more mysterious than his previous one. Such strange things could also be formed naturally. What puzzled Lei Xingfeng the most was that this naturally formed restriction wasn't any worse than a man-made restriction. He didn't even need to test its power to know how dangerous it was. After carefully observing the formation of the restriction, he learned some restriction knowledge. According to Lei Xingfeng's thoughts, learning restrictions relied on continuous learning and accumulation. Only then could there be progress. Therefore, whenever he encountered a restriction, whether it was good or bad, he would seriously study it. This was also the reason why he had a better grasp of restrictions. After a while, Lei Xingfeng flew back into the air. Seeing Ma Zhang's trembling appearance, he couldn't help but laugh. "You dare to enter the fantasy sky realm like this? You don't understand restrictions at all. I'm afraid of the restrictions here. They're really powerful." In fact, Lei Xingfeng had already restrained himself. The restrictions here were not only powerful, but many of them were interconnected. It was completely different from the natural restrictions that Lei Xingfeng had seen last time. This place was much more exquisite and natural. Mahjong said, "Well, you're here, aren't you? Otherwise, I wouldn't have come." Lei Xingfeng said, "By the way, what else did you hear?" Mahjong was stunned. "What did you hear? You didn't you?" Wei Xiaobao said in his heart, "Didn't you hate it when I said I heard something? Why are you asking me now?" Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "Yes, what you heard, some of them are quite valuable." Mahjong said, "I did hear some news, but I don't know if it's useful. Lei Xingfeng said, let's go down first. You can tell him later. He already understood that this fellow must have met a very powerful fellow in the past and was very familiar with this place. The two landed on the ground. Ma Zhang looked around and said, there's nothing here. It's all broken stones. Lei Xingfeng said, there won't be anything else here. There are natural restrictions here. If there were animals or plants, they would definitely be crushed by the restrictions here. Ma Zhang said, all right. I admit that my knowledge of restrictions is not as good as yours. Lei Xingfeng said, you don't have to admit it. My restrictions are indeed stronger than yours. Ma Zhang did not want to argue with Lei Xingfeng. He had already admitted that Lei Xingfeng's control of restrictions was at a level that he could not reach. The gap was as wide as heaven and earth. He actually admired Lei Xingfeng very much. It should be known that when a person cultivated to a certain level, they would not be able to be distracted. Lei Xingfeng was not only successful in cultivation, but his control of restrictions was also extremely powerful. Ma Zhang said, I heard that once you land successfully, you have to rely on luck to escape. If you are lucky, you might be able to enter the fantasy sky realm. Lei Xingfeng said in surprise, that's what you heard? Isn't that nonsense? Ma Zhang said, it's not nonsense. This proves that, after landing, even if there are restrictions attacking you, you should be able to defend against them. In other words, you won't be trapped in a forbidden area where you will definitely die. Lei Xingfeng thought about it carefully. It made sense. Although the restrictions here were dangerous, monarch-level experts could already barely resist them. If one reached intermediate monarch level and above, there would not be much danger. At most, they would be in a difficult situation. Do you know which direction to run in? Ma Zhang shook his head and said, I really don't know. I heard that you can run as you wish, as long as you're not trapped by the restrictions. Lei Xingfeng said, so it's like that. He began to observe the restrictions around him again. At this time, he had a new discovery. As expected, although there were many restrictions, they were also killing formations. As long as you were fast enough, you could definitely charge through. The key was that you could not hesitate. Nodding his head, Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, that's right. It's like that. As long as you charge through, you can't be trapped. Even if you're trapped, you will just suffer a little. It's always easier in the beginning. Lei Xingfeng said again, that's right. You choose a direction. We will go together. Ma Zhang looked around awkwardly. In his eyes, he was surrounded by an endless stretch of rocks. He did not know where to go. After a while, Ma Zhang pointed ahead hesitantly and said, then let's just charge. Before he finished speaking, he had already charged out. Lei Xingfeng was stunned. When this guy charged into the restrictions, he shouted, why are you in such a hurry? Large balls of flames quickly covered the front. Ma Zhang screamed and charged forward crazily. In an instant, Ma Zhang's clothes were all on fire. This guy's real body suddenly burst out, and his clothes were all burned to ashes. Then he directly charged through. His speed was extremely fast. The place where Ma Zhang stopped was just right. It was right at the edge of the two restrictions, just a few meters away. Lei Xingfeng was also very surprised. This guy could not see the nodes of the restrictions. How did he know that there was a gap to hide in? Moreover, when Ma Zhang rushed to that gap, he also withdrew his real body at the same time and hurriedly put on his clothes. Lei Xingfeng looked at the restrictions that were gradually calming down. He could not help but admit that this guy was really lucky. If he took a few more steps, the second restriction would explode. Ma Zhang's face was covered in dust. He looked at Lei Xingfeng, who was still standing in the distance, and asked curiously, hey, why aren't you charging? Lei Xingfeng said, idiot, why should I charge? I am a restriction master. Ma Zhang did not understand. He said, what's wrong with being a restriction master? So what if you were a restriction master? This guy was very unhappy. Lei Xingfeng waited until the restrictions completely calmed down before stepping into the restrictions. Ma Zhang was dumbfounded. He watched as Lei Xingfeng walked left and right, sometimes forward and sometimes back. He came to his side as if he was taking a stroll. As for the restrictions, there was no reaction at all. This was simply unbearable. He was screaming from the flames, but this guy walked over so easily. This was too much of a bully. Ma Zhang shouted, "Hey, you can't play like this. You told me to charge, but you didn't move. In the end, you walked over unscathed. You are too deceitful." Lei Xingfeng said unhappily, "You deserve it." Ma Zhang was so angry that he screamed. Lei Xingfeng said, "Did I tell you to charge? Am I a restriction master, or are you a restriction master? If you don't listen to my orders, you will be the unlucky one. Do you understand?" Only then did Ma Zhang remember that in his excitement, he had charged into the restriction and Xian Feng hadn't spoken at all. He couldn't help but droop his head dejectedly. All right, consider me unlucky." Lei Xingfeng then asked curiously, "Why did you stop here? Take 2 more steps, and you'll enter the next restriction." Ma Zhang was shocked. He said, "I don't know why I stopped." Lei Xingfeng could only conclude that this guy's luck was really good. He stopped where he should stop. Sizing up Ma Zhang, Xian Feng couldn't help but laugh. Even if this fellow had changed into a new set of clothes, his face was still as dirty as ever. His hair had been burnt, and one of his eyebrows had been burnt, leaving only one eyebrow. His entire person looked extremely strange and ugly. Ma Zhang said, "What are you laughing at? What's so funny?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You only have one eyebrow left. The hairy parts of your body are all clean, right?" "Ha ha!" Ma Zhang touched his face and said, "It's fine if it's burned. What's so great about having no hair? It's fine as long as I'm alive." Lei Xingfeng also reacted. The cultivators of this world did not care about a person's beauty or ugliness. No matter how ugly they were, as long as they could improve their strength, no one would care even if they were ugly. Ma Zhang said, "Okay, you lead the way for the next step." Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "You don't want to charge?" Ma Zhang rolled his eyes and said, "I'm not stupid. If you can pass safely, why should I charge?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Then be more honest. Don't act on your own. You will get me into trouble." Ma Zhang said, "Don't worry. I know. I will listen to you. I will listen to everything you say." Lei Xingfeng said, "Are you all ready? Let's go through this restriction." Among the densely packed restriction nodes, there are still many gaps for people to pass through. Xian Feng spoke, "Follow me closely. Pay attention to my movements. If I move sideways, you move sideways. If I move sideways, if I move sideways, you move sideways. If I move sideways, if I move sideways, you move sideways. Follow my rhythm." Ma Zhang said, "Remember, you are very annoying." Lei Xingfeng did not speak anymore and stepped into the restriction. Ma Zhang hurriedly followed, his whole body almost sticking to Lei Xingfeng's back. Lei Xingfeng slapped him and said, "You are too close. Keep a distance of 1 meter and watch my movements clearly. Idiot." Ma Zhang could only take a step back and stare at Lei Xingfeng carefully. Lei Xingfeng only walked a few steps, then suddenly squatted down and moved forward little by little. After moving about 7 or 8 meters, Lei Xingfeng turned sideways and walked to the left. After moving a few steps horizontally, Lei Xingfeng suddenly jumped up and swept past a few meters high. Ma Zhang had a hard time. He had to follow Xian Feng's movements and walk. He couldn't make any mistakes. As for why he had to walk like this, Ma Zhang couldn't understand. He didn't know about the existence of restriction nodes. Chapter 737. What surprised Ma Zhang the most was that after entering the restricted area for a few hundred meters, the entire restriction didn't react at all. He couldn't help but admire Lei Xingfeng in his heart. This was too mystical. One could actually walk through a restriction like this, silently passing through a dangerous restriction. At this moment, Ma Zhang was full of confidence in Lei Xingfeng. After a few twists and turns, Ma Zhang realized that although there was nothing in the air, Lei Xingfeng's movements seemed to be avoiding something. Slowly, Ma Zhang figured out something. He didn't dare to ask now, but after passing through this restriction, he would have a lot to say. After walking for about an hour, Lei Xingfeng suddenly stopped and said, "We passed through this restriction." This was a relatively large restriction, at least a few thousand meters wide. If one were to charge through it forcefully, it might only take a few minutes. However, just a few minutes was enough to make one unable to bear it. Mahjong was very satisfied with passing through it like this. It was just that it took some time. Mahjong was full of praise. He knew very well that no one knew what kind of powerful restriction they would encounter. With Lei Xingfeng leading the way, the danger was minimized. Lei Xingfeng rested for a moment. It wasn't his body that was tired, but his eyes. He sat on the ground and closed his eyes to rest, ignoring Ma Zhang's nagging. After about 10 minutes, Lei Xingfeng stood up and observed the restrictions around him again. The restrictions here were similar to the natural restrictions that Lei Xingfeng saw, but they were more complicated. There were so many types of restrictions that even he felt his scalp tingle. He didn't know what the cultivators who tried to force their way through were relying on to survive. Even with Xing Feng's cultivation and strength, he wouldn't be able to withstand the continuous explosions of restrictions. Thinking up to this point, Lei Xingfeng suddenly understood why Xing Feng wanted to drag him into the fantasy sky realm. Xing Feng wanted to rely on his knowledge of restrictions. The reason why Xing Feng taught him was probably because he wanted to have the strength to enter the fantasy sky realm. If Lei Xingfeng had not reached the monarch rank, even if he followed Xing Feng into the fantasy sky realm, he might be killed by the powerful restrictions before he could even remove them. Lei Xingfeng actually had some doubts in his heart. Naturally formed restrictions were so dense and varied. If they were really formed naturally, then it would be too amazing. He had a lot of doubts in his heart, but he couldn't find an answer. These restrictions were really natural. He couldn't find any trace of artificial. It was as if they were naturally formed. This isn't right. However, no matter how much Lei Xingfeng thought about it and searched carefully, there was still no response. In the end, he could only give up. Lei Xingfeng tried his best to choose a single restriction. Walking here, their safety was guaranteed. If he chose a compound restriction, the danger would be greatly increased. This was because some compound restrictions had moving restriction nodes. He might be able to dodge them, but Ma Zhang definitely wouldn't be able to, because he couldn't see the restriction nodes. This was the trouble of bringing people. If it was just Lei Xingfeng alone, their speed would be much faster. Lei Xingfeng couldn't see everything in a circle. He chose a direction and said, "Follow me." Ma Zhang followed the same way as last time. They walked forward, twisting and turning. After passing through a few restrictions, Lei Xingfeng stopped and said, "The restriction in front is more complicated. We have to slow down. Try our best to keep up. Remember, once you touch the restriction, I won't care," Ma Zhang said. "Ah, you can't leave me alone." Lei Xingfeng helplessly explained, "It's not that I don't care, but that I can't. Once you touch the restriction, I won't be able to stop it, so I will run away quickly." Ma Zhang was scared witless as he said, Okay, I will be very careful." Lei Xingfeng had no choice but to choose a compound restriction area this time. This was because, other than the single restriction behind them, the other three sides were all compound restrictions. Lei Xingfeng said, "This time, get close to me. Within 1 meter, do the same thing as me." Ma Zhang agreed and hastily walked forward a few steps, standing behind Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go." This time, they were lucky. The two of them walked with great difficulty. Lei Xingfeng constantly sped up and slowed down, causing Ma Zhang to sweat profusely. Because the restriction nodes were moving, some were slow, some were fast. They had to be precise to move. However, in the last few minutes, Ma Zhang was still brushed by the restriction. Although the restriction didn't explode, it still made Lei Xingfeng break out in cold sweat, let alone Ma Zhang. The moment the restriction exploded, the two of them left the compound restriction. Looking back at the explosion, the two of them had a lingering fear. Lei Xingfeng said, "This restriction isn't easy to pass." "Ma Zhang, you still touched the restriction." Ma Zhang complained, "I didn't even move." Who knew that the restriction would explode? Damn, I was scared to death. Luckily, I reached the edge. Otherwise, I would have died. Lei Xingfeng said, "This restriction can't take your life, but it can definitely torment you, to the point of death. Once this restriction is fully activated, the restrictions on the side will also move. Luckily, we only touched it lightly, so the restriction won't explode. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to stand here." Ma Zhang covered his head and said, I hate restrictions. How can there be such a strange place? Lei Xingfeng sighed. The more this kind of place is, the better the things. This sentence left Ma Zhang speechless. If it weren't for such a perverted restriction, where would they be able to find cultivation materials at their level? Lei Xingfeng said, I'll rest for a while. You wait. Ma Zhang nodded and said, Okay, I'll guard. Lei Xingfeng sat down and closed his eyes. After charging lightning into his eyes for such a long time, he couldn't take it anymore. Tears were about to flow out, so he took the time to rest. At least, he let his eyes recover. Suddenly, there was a roar in the distance. That was the sound of the restriction activating. Lei Xingfeng stood up from the ground and said, Where? Where did the restriction activate? Ma Zhang stared into the distance. There was a faint smoke rising. He knew it was the effect of the restriction. The only reason was that someone had entered the restriction. As for who entered, Ma Zhang and Lei Xingfeng couldn't see from where they were. It was quite far away. Ma Zhang said, Let's go and take a look. Lei Xingfeng said helplessly, Are you crazy? Ma Zhang said, How am I crazy? I'm just curious. He suddenly reacted. Indeed, he was crazy. It was difficult for him to walk in the restriction area. How could he go and watch? Exine Feng spoke. When encountering such a situation, there's only one choice, and that is to leave as far as possible. It's not like you don't know. Once the restrictions are connected, all of them will activate at the same time. That would be a huge explosion. I have confidence in dealing with a few restrictions, but once all of them activate, we'll all die inside. In fact, he still had a way to escape. With the mirror world, he could cheat. Especially after he fully controlled the mirror world, he could open a secret door to escape even in the restriction area. Ma Zhang said, You're not resting? Lei Xingfeng said unhappily, Rest my ass. I don't know which bastard disturbed the restriction. Once this guy rushes out, I'm sure he will attack the next restriction. If it's a single restriction, it's fine. If it's a compound restriction, even if we're so far away, we'll be implicated. Let's go. Ma Zhang was also confused. He said, They're so far away. Okay, let's go now. Looking at Lei Xingfeng's knife-like eyes, he was frightened. If Lei Xingfeng got angry and left alone, he would be completely trapped in the restriction. He didn't dare to believe that he could escape with his own ability. Lei Xingfeng said, Go from here. This was the direction away from the other side. He was also very angry. Whether it was a human, an outsider, or a star beast in the restriction, they all made him unhappy. The worst thing was that if the other side was a super expert and forcefully broke through the restriction, the consequences would be severe. The stronger the expert, the more severe the consequences. Lei Xingfeng was very clear about this. The worst thing was that the restriction in the opposite direction was a compound restriction. Similarly, the restriction nodes were constantly moving. Although Lei Xingfeng could already feel some of the rules, it was still a compound restriction. He couldn't really be sure how the restriction nodes would move. Lei Xingfeng warned, once the restriction is triggered, the entire restriction will explode. Then, you must rush forward without hesitation. Ma Zhang said nervously, I know. Once the restriction activates, we must rush forward with all our might. Should I release my true body? Lei Xingfeng said, Of course you have to release your true body. Without the protection of your true body, you can't block the compound attack of the restriction. Entering the restriction again, Ma Zhang kept muttering, Why are there so many restrictions? It's simply endless. I'm so annoyed. Lei Xingfeng said in a deep voice, You're so annoyed. All right, I'll go by myself. You stay in the restriction. Don't be annoyed. The restriction will definitely kill you. Ma Zhang was instantly terrified. He repeatedly said, Ayaya, don't leave me behind. I was just complaining. I didn't want to die. He had already been tormented by Lei Xingfeng to the point that he didn't have any temper. In his heart, when he saw Lei Xingfeng, he felt like he had seen a ghost. He was scared. According to Lei Xingfeng's movements, he still had to stay close to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't know when he would trigger the restriction. The more he came into contact with restrictions, the more Ma Zhang hated them. He was really tied up and couldn't do anything. What Mahjong was most afraid of now was that Lei Xingfeng would leave him behind and act alone. Then he would be caught unprepared. He didn't even know when he could leave the restriction circle. The more afraid he was, the more trouble he would encounter. Unknowingly, Ma Zhang's mind wandered. Then he heard Lei Xingfeng shout, "Release your true body. Charge!" Ma Zhang shuddered. He knew he was in trouble. He subconsciously released his true body. In an instant, countless attacks landed on him. He let out a strange cry and rushed forward crazily. Lei Xingfeng didn't release his true body. Instead, he ran with Ma Zhang. Chapter 738. This was the specialty of seals. Whoever was the biggest target would be the target of the attacks. Lei Xingfeng did not release his true body. His true body was not visible within the seal. Hence, all the attacks landed on Ma Zhang. Only a small portion landed on Lei Xingfeng. He did not care about these attacks. Ma Zhang ran forward with all his might, causing the entire seal to explode. All sorts of attacks landed on him. This was a compound seal. Its attacks were terrifying. Lei Xingfeng felt a chill in his heart. He had observed this seal before and knew that it was perverse. He was not sure if Ma Zhang could escape in one go. All sorts of attacks hit Ma Zhang until he screamed. He could not defend himself. He could only use his true body to resist. This was because he did not dare to stand still. He could only run forward. At this moment, he chose to believe Lei Xingfeng's words. He had no choice. If he did not believe Lei Xingfeng, he could only rely on himself. He could not rely on himself. In the end, he chose to believe Lei Xingfeng, as expected of a sovereign king level expert. Even if he was just a beginner sovereign king, his strength was still rather impressive. As he ran madly, the attacks of the restrictions did not slow him down at all. This time, Ma Zhang was really going all out. The most important reason was that this guy was frightened and almost subconsciously ran madly. In less than a minute, he had reached the edge of the seal. But at this moment, the true power of the seal exploded. His huge true body was like the sun. The countless seal attacks forced Ma Zhang to stop. It was difficult for him to take another step. Was he going to die here? The thought flashed through his mind. Ma Zhang could not describe the feeling in his heart. Suddenly, Xian Feng's true body was released. He was a smart man. At such a crucial moment, he wouldn't just watch as a joke. He charged forward and aimed for Xian Feng's, but kicking it fiercely as he roared, "Use more strength. Go!" The two of them, one in front and one behind, rushed out of the seal. As soon as they stepped out of the formation, the two of them withdrew their true forms at the same time to prevent their huge bodies from provoking the attacks of the restrictions on the side. Ma Zhang had no choice but to withdraw his true form as he was unable to withstand the attacks. Lei Xingfeng took the initiative to withdraw his true form. The two of them looked back at the same time, only to see that the restriction formation was extremely violent. Countless attacks were launched aimlessly. After losing track of the two of them, the entire restriction formation fell into chaos. It took a few minutes before it gradually calmed down. Ma Zhang said, "Thank you." He knew very well that if it wasn't for Lei Xingfeng kicking him hard, he probably wouldn't have been able to get out. He was too crazy at the start, but when he reached the edge, he became powerless. Lei Xingfeng's face turned pale as well. He did not expect that this compound seal could actually trap a monarch-grade expert. It was too scary. The sounds of explosions could still be heard from afar. Xian Feng spoke. "That fellow is trapped here. We can't stop. After passing through another restriction, we'll be much safer." Ma Zhang's legs turned to jelly as he said, "Let's rest for a while," Lei Xingfeng said bluntly. "If you want to die, then rest." Ma Zhang's face was bitter as he released his own seal. He then took out a box of energy crystal fragments and let the seal absorb them all in one go. He had to replenish the energy that he used up. If not, he would have no energy at all. Once the seal lacked energy, his entire body would become weak. Lei Xingfeng asked curiously, "You use these things?" He was curious. One must know that ever since he received Xing Feng's teachings on condensing energy crystals, his Lei Yin had never lacked energy. He could tell at a glance that the energy fragments that Ma Zhang used were natural energy fragments. They had never been condensed before. Even though there was a lot of them in the box, Lei Xingfeng knew that these fragments were not enough to condense an energy crystal. Ma Zhang said, "These are given to me by the cultivators from my hometown. Without these things, once we fight, I won't be able to handle it." Lei Xingfeng shook his head. He understood in his heart that this guy did not know Xingfeng's method of condensing energy crystals. Of course, he was not stupid enough to tell him. After all, the two of them were temporary partners and not real friends. This method was not something that everyone knew. After Ma Zhang finished absorbing and recovered a little, the two of them once again walked into the restriction. This was a single restriction, so the restriction nodes would not move. This time they walked very smoothly. The key was that Ma Zhang did not dare to let his imagination run wild. Just now, because his mind was wandering, he had lost a whole box of energy crystals. He could have saved them, but this made his heart ache. He could not bear to part with these energy fragments. Even though he brought out a lot, every bit that could be used was a little less. Lei Xingfeng walked carefully in front. Drops of tears began to appear in his eyes. Those were not tears caused by sorrow, but tears caused by the stimulation of lightning. With great difficulty, the two of them walked out of the restriction. Lei Xingfeng wiped away his tears. Ma Zhang opened his mouth wide and did not know what to say. After a while, he carefully said, This. You cried?" Lei Xingfeng was furious. He kicked him and said, "You're the one who cried. Your whole family cried." Ma Zhang said gloomily, "You're the one who cried. I didn't. Besides, my family is long dead. I can't cry in the ground." Lei Xingfeng was choked speechless. Seeing that Lei Xingfeng was about to flip out, Ma Zhang immediately admitted defeat. He raised his hand and said, "It's my fault. It's my fault. I was talking nonsense." Lei Xingfeng could not even flip out. He was so angry that he turned his head and ignored this guy. After walking here, he was also tired. He sat down and closed his eyes to rest. Ma Zhang was bored to death. He stared into the distance. It was still lively there, but the sounds were gradually moving further away. This meant that the people who were trapped in the restriction were moving in a different direction. This made him completely relieved. If they were moving in the same direction, they would definitely be implicated in the end. If they were moving in a different direction, they would be further away. Even if they caused the entire restriction to go berserk, the impact would be much smaller. Therefore, Ma Zhang was relieved. After sitting for 2 hours, Lei Xingfeng leaned against Lei Yin. Only then did he stabilize the urge to cry and feel much better. He stood up and listened for a moment. Lei Xingfeng said, "The sounds are getting further away. Oh, this way we are safe. Eat something and rest." Ma Zhang was actually tired and thirsty. If Xine Feng hadn't mentioned it, he wouldn't have felt it, but now that Xine Feng had mentioned it, his stomach started to growl. He spoke, "That's right, I'm hungry. I'm so nervous that I don't feel hungry or tired, but now that you mentioned it, it's all here." He waved his hand in the air. A table and 2 chairs appeared out of thin air. He sat down and said, "I have some food here from my hometown. Want to try it?" Lei Xingfeng also sat down and said, "What's good? Take it out and try it." Ma Zhang took out 2 thick pancakes the size of pot lids and said, "This is a specialty of my hometown. It's sconce. It's very good food." Lei Xingfeng took it. Electric arcs flashed in his hand. With a few crackling sounds, the whole sconce emitted a faint steam. This sconce was very oily. When he bit into it, it was soft and fragrant. It was very delicious. It tasted like the butter sconce of his previous life, except that there were no sesame seeds on it. Ma Zhang revealed an expectant expression and said, "Is it good?" Lei Xingfeng said, "It is indeed delicious. It is very delicious." As he spoke, he took out 2 bottles of wine brewed from fruits. That thing was sweet and did not have much alcohol content. He drank it like water. Ma Zhang smiled happily. The taste of his hometown was always good. The two of them ate to their heart's content. Lei Xingfeng ate 4 sconces and even took out some meat to eat. After eating, the two of them could be considered to have recovered. Ma Zhang said, "Let's continue." This is not a place to stay for long. Lei Xingfeng nodded and listened attentively. He said, yes, they're already very far away from us. Okay, I think we should be able to get out if we pass through a few more restrictions. Ma Zhang agreed. It's impossible. There are endless restrictions. There will always be an end. Under Lei Xingfeng's lead, the two of them continued to pass through the restrictions. After about 3 days, they finally walked out of the restriction circle. Then, Lei Xingfeng saw a cliff. They were standing at the top of the cliff. This was a cliff. They could not see the other side, nor could they see what was below the cliff. The two of them looked at each other in confusion. After a while, Lei Xingfeng said, "What the hell is this place?" Ma Zhang said, "I will look at this side. You look at that side." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay." The two of them split up to look. After a while, they gathered again. After a little comparison, the two of them were dumbfounded. This thing was like the bow of a warship. It was triangular in shape, and behind it was the restriction circle. There was a sharp point here, just like the bow of a large ship. They could not see what was below, nor could they see what was in front. The two of them came to the meeting point of the cliff, which was the highest point of the bow. Lei Xingfeng said, "What else did you hear?" Ma Zhang said, "I really did not hear anything this time. This is also my first time here." As they spoke, the restriction circle behind them suddenly let out a thunderous roar. Instantly, the entire ground shook. Lei Xingfeng said in a low voice, "Damn, all the restrictions have exploded. This guy finally activated all the restrictions. He is really a F***king genius." Ma Zhang said, "Isn't it easy to cause all the restrictions to explode? Why do you have to say that?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Do you think it's easy to cause all the restrictions to explode? If you don't cause enough trouble, how can all the restrictions explode? Unless this guy is a super expert, he is dead for sure." Ma Zhang said, "Fortunately, we came out. Otherwise, we would have been implicated." Lei Xingfeng said, "Although he did not implicate us, we have nowhere else to go. Do we have to climb down this cliff?" Ma Zhang said, "Do you have any other way? You have to climb down. Or flying down is also fine." Lei Xingfeng said, "You dare to fly? In any case, I don't dare to fly. There are so many restrictions here. Who knows if there is a restriction that forbids flying?" Ma Zhang was shocked. He said, "There is a restriction that forbids flying?" This guy really had never heard of it. Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't tell me you don't even know about the restriction that forbids flying?" Ma Zhang smiled bitterly and said, I really don't know." Chapter 739. When Lei Xingfeng looked at the cliff, he realized that something was wrong. The color of the cliff was completely different from the cliffs that Lei Xingfeng had seen before. It was a pale, grayish-white color, and there were circular patterns on it. It looked very strange. Ma Zhang also observed carefully and said, "It is indeed strange. Shall we go down and take a look?" After thinking for a while, Lei Xingfeng said, "I will go first. You follow behind. Don't be in a hurry to fall behind. Just watch what I do and follow." Until now, he was sure that Ma Zhang had seen too little of the world. He was a simple youth. However, this guy was not young anymore. Lei Xingfeng had his back to the cliff, and his face was facing outside. He slid down the cliff. Relying on his flying instincts, he would not fall down immediately. Ma Zhang followed suit and slid down with his back to the cliff. The cliff was relatively smooth, as if it had been polished. However, both of them knew that this cliff could not be polished. It was a natural cliff. As for why it was like this, it was like asking why there was a natural seal. It was an unsolvable mystery. Lei Xingfeng controlled the speed of his slide. He did not let himself fall too quickly and even deliberately slowed down. He could feel the smoothness of his back. Because his eyes had been stimulated too deeply, he did not dare to charge lightning into his eyes. For now, he could not see anything. The two of them, one in front and one behind, slowly descended. Soon Ma Zhang shouted, "Here! There is a big crack here." Lei Xingfeng turned his head to look. Indeed, there was a crack not far below, to the right. This crack was horizontal, and it looked like a big mouth. Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, let's slide over." They slid down the cliff. Fortunately, they did not rely on gravity to slide down. Instead, they relied on their flying skills. The two of them did not dare to fly in the air. Instead, they leaned on the cliff, half flying and half sliding. Otherwise, they would not be able to control themselves like this. It was a very neat horizontal crack. Lei Xingfeng fell into the crack and said in surprise, "This crack looks like it was cut by a knife." The crack was about 10 meters wide and 100 meters long. The two sides were so narrow that they closed in. If one flew outside and looked, it would look like a smiling mouth. It was very strange. It was not deep inside. It also looked like it was cut by a knife. The deeper they went, the narrower it became. Finally, it became a thin crack. It was a very smooth crack. There was nothing inside. Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang circled around. Ma Zhang said, "There doesn't seem to be any treasure. You are thinking too much." Lei Xingfeng said, and could not help but hear rumbling sounds on the cliff. Lei could not help but say, "This guy was not killed by the seal, was still not be killed by the seal." He could not help but said, "This guy was not killed by the seal, was not the seal still not killed." He said, could not help but said, "This guy was still not dead, was still not dead." From said, Ma Zhang looked up. In fact, he could not see anything. He said, "This person is probably very powerful." Lei Xingfeng knew that the power of such a large seal was very scary. To be able to hold on until now. This person was at least as strong as him. Ma Zhang stood beside Lei Xingfeng and said, "Continue." Lei Xingfeng said, "Of course. Continue. Otherwise, are you going to go back up?" Ma Zhang was shocked and said, "Don't. You will be seeking death if you go up." Lei Xingfeng smiled and continued to slide down the cliff. Ma Zhang followed. Soon, the two entered the layer of clouds. Everything around them was a blur. Lei Xingfeng said, "Be careful. Slow down." He did not know what was below, so he had to be careful. They did not know how long they had been sliding. Slowly, the two came out of the cloud layer. Looking down, it was still a blank. Lei Xingfeng felt that something was wrong. They had been sliding for too long. Why could they not see land? The surroundings gradually darkened. Lei Xingfeng said, "What the hell is this place?" He was also a little scared. It was a fear of the unknown. Ma Zhang was even more so. He followed Lei Xingfeng all the way down, and his heart was getting more and more uneasy. As they slid, Ma Zhang said, "I think I see a raised piece of ground." As they descended, both of them saw the ground. It was not big, and it was shaped like an ingot. There was a big bulge in the middle, and there were sharp corners on both sides. It was really strange to the extreme. The ground was also grayish-white, and it was also very smooth. Ma Zhang said, "This thing looks like a bone." Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "How can there be such a big bone? It looks like a bone, but I don't think it's a bone. It looks like jade." Ma Zhang said, "Jade?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, jade, and it's a very beautiful jade." Ma Zhang said, "Why do I feel like there's nothing beautiful about it?" Lei Xingfeng took out a steel drill and forcefully stabbed it into the ground. There was a light tinkling sound. Lei Xingfeng was stunned. Ma Zhang was also surprised and said, "It's so hard?" With Lei Xingfeng's strength, using a steel drill to continuously stab the ground would leave a mark even on the hardest rock. But these few stabs did not even leave a mark on the ground. It was unimaginably hard. Lei Xingfeng said, "Holy sh*t, this thing is not bad. It's so hard." There were all kinds of materials. Hard materials had their uses. Especially hard materials, they could be used to make many things. For example, when making seal components, the base material had to be very hard. Lei Xingfeng's hobby of collecting things was triggered. He said, "No, since we're already here, we have to collect some of these things." Ma Zhang was puzzled and said, "How are you going to collect them? You don't know where to start. They're so hard." Lei Xingfeng put away the steel drill and said, "The steel drill can't do it, but it doesn't mean that other tools can't." As he spoke, he took out a sword seal. This thing was a weapon, and its attack power was strong enough. Ma Zhang could not help but cry out, "What? What are you doing? Wow. You're not going to use a weapon to attack the ground, are you? Is it going to collapse?" Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Who knows? Let's try it first. Mahjong immediately rushed to the edge of the cliff and swam up along the cliff. Then he stopped at a height of 100 meters, looking like he wanted to stay away. Lei Xingfeng raised the sword seal and smashed it down. With a loud bang, the entire cliff shook. Lei Xingfeng did not dare to use his full strength in this attack. He used about 50% of his strength. Countless cracks appeared on the ground and spread along the point of impact. The sound of cracking could be heard. Ma Zhang's face was pale. He said, Hey, you don't mess around. Lei Xingfeng said, I'm not messing around. As he spoke, he smashed down again. Boom! The ground completely cracked, and debris flew everywhere. Lei Xingfeng chose to pick up the big pieces. With the cracks, it was easier to pry open with the steel drill. At this time, it was easier to dig. Ma Zhang quickly slid down and reached out to pick it up. Lei Xingfeng knocked him with the steel drill and said, Dig it yourself. Ma Zhang cried out, I can't break it open. Lei Xingfeng said angrily, You haven't even tried. How do you know you can't break it open? Go away. This piece of ground was about 1 kilometer in radius. It was not big, but there was enough space for Ma Zhang to dig. Lei Xingfeng unceremoniously pushed him to the side. As for how he would dig, it was not something Lei Xingfeng cared about. Ma Zhang did not have the sword seal. He had no choice but to release his real body. He took out a huge hammer and smashed it down. But how could a hammer compare to a sword seal? Even after releasing his real body, Ma Zhang's strength was boundless. But after a few smashes, the handle of the hammer broke. He was like a dog biting a hedgehog. Ma Zhang was so anxious that he jumped up and down. He shouted, A phone! Help me break it open. Otherwise, I can't dig. Lei Xingfeng ignored him and kept using the steel drill to pry open piece after piece of stone. In fact, Lei Xingfeng knew in his heart that this was definitely not stone. It was another kind of material. It was just that he did not know what it was, but it was definitely something good. Once the steel drill could not pry open, Lei Xingfeng would use the sword seal to smash it and then continue digging. Ma Zhang was busy going back and forth. No one knew what he was busy with. In any case, if he could not break open the ground, he would not be able to obtain this strange material. Soon, a large hole appeared. Ma Zhang ran over and said pitifully, Dig here for me. I'm begging you. There were many places in the large hole that could be pried open. Lei Xingfeng was digging around the large hole. Ma Zhang wanted to dig on one side, so they each dug in one direction. Ma Zhang had an opening. Lei Xingfeng said, All right, you dig one side, I'll dig the other. You're not allowed to come over and dig, understand? Ma Zhang immediately beamed with joy. He jumped into the hole and asked Lei Xingfeng for a steel drill. He also began to pry open the cracks in the ground and finally obtained his first piece of material. Soon, Lei Xingfeng discovered that this material was actually mixed with energy crystals. The deeper they dug, the more mixed crystals there were. Moreover, these crystals were extremely pure. They were the size of grapes. They were sandwiched between the rocks, revealing the crystal surface. Ma Zhang also discovered it. He said, Were these sparkling crystals, energy crystals? Lei Xingfeng said, Yes, they are energy crystals. Moreover, they're very pure and contain a lot of energy. They're definitely good stuff. Ma Zhang said emotionally, Wow, finally there is a reward. No wonder they all came over when they reached the high level. They can get good stuff just by digging. Xian Feng's digging speed wasn't something that Ma Zhang could compare to. This fellow was clumsy and couldn't compare to Xian Feng's speed. For every stone that Ma Zhang dug out, Xian Feng would dig out at least 10, definitely 10 times faster than Xian Feng's, causing Ma Zhang's eyes to turn red. He knew how precious this thing was, although he didn't know what use it had, but just the energy crystals inside was enough to make him go crazy. Once there were no more cracks to be used, Lei Xingfeng would use his sword seal to smash a few times and continue. Ma Zhang was having a hard time. He could only release his true body and use his huge fist to smash the edge of the large hole. One had to know that the size of the fist of his true body corresponded to the size of the area it smashed. The ground was unimaginably hard. According to Ma Zhang's knowledge, this fist could definitely flatten a small mountain. However, the most he could do here was to smash a few cracks. Compared to Lei Xingfeng's sword seal, it was a far cry. Chapter 740. The more anxious one was, the slower one's speed would be. Ma Zhang watched Xianfeng collect the materials piece by piece, his heart filled with unhappiness. Not being as good as him in terms of restrictions, not being as good as him in terms of strength, not even being as good as him in terms of mining, it was truly depressing. Lei Xingfeng dug for half a day before he remembered to charge his eyes with lightning. He wanted to see what was different here. In an instant, silver light flickered in his eyes. Lei Xingfeng was shocked to find that the cliff and ground were glowing. This was a very special kind of light. It was the first time he had seen it. After careful observation, he gradually understood. There were a few rays of light that were particularly strong, forming a twisted line. The other rays of light were much weaker, and the hole he dug was right beside a ray of light. No wonder he could dig out crystals. Since he saw it clearly, Lei Xingfeng consciously dug towards the ray of light. Sure enough, he didn't dig far before the crystals in the stone became denser. There were many such rays of light on the cliff, but Lei Xingfeng knew that it was really inconvenient to dig up the cliff. Moreover, he didn't have much time. Lei Xingfeng knew that he could keep the coordinates and use the mirror realm to dig. He could even send people to dig, so he just needed to dig a little. Of course, Lei Xingfeng also hoped that the quality was better. Ma Zhang dug hard. He didn't have time to complain. He knew that Lei Xingfeng would definitely leave soon. Before that, he had to dig a little more. He might not have a chance to start over in the future. The two of them didn't say a word as they dug. They dug for 2 whole days. What was most inconceivable to them was that there were still rumbling sounds coming from the top of the cliff. That meant that the person above was still trapped in the formation. At this time, the two of them were secretly impressed. That fellow really had great endurance. After 2 days, he still hadn't been killed by the formation. A trench appeared on the ground. Xianfeng had completely dug out the light belt on the ground. He wasn't willing to continue digging. After all, there wasn't enough time. He spoke. "All right, Ma Zhang, we'll stop here. We still have to continue down." Ma Zhang looked unwilling. He said, "Let's dig for a few more days. It's a pity to give up. Other things aside, just the natural energy crystals here are worth digging." Lei Xingfeng had dug up all the good stuff. He obviously didn't want to keep it. He said, "Up to you." Ma Zhang said happily, "You agree?" Lei Xingfeng said, "What did I agree to? I mean, you can dig for as long as you want. I'm leaving." Ma Zhang was immediately discouraged. He said, Me alone? I can't." Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "I'm leaving. It's up to you whether you want to follow me or not." Without hesitation, Lei Xingfeng went to the edge. There was another circle of cliffs here. Sitting on the edge, Lei Xingfeng turned back and said with a smile, "Let's go." He then slid down. Ma Zhang shouted, "Wait for me." He slid down the cliff without any delay. Xianfeng tilted his head and saw Ma Zhang sliding down. He could not help but laugh to himself. This fellow had a bit of a child's temper, although he was a bit messy, but overall, he was a pretty good companion. At least the journey wouldn't be too lonely. Ma Zhang noticed that Lei Xingfeng was slowing down. He had already slid down. His heart skipped a beat, and he quickly stopped. He waited until Lei Xingfeng slid to his side before he slid down bit by bit. Lei Xingfeng grinned. You become smarter." "Ha!" Ma Zhang suddenly felt his scalp tingle. He didn't know why Lei Xingfeng was laughing, but he knew that it was definitely not a good thing. After sliding for about half a day, Lei Xingfeng's speed became slower and slower. This made Ma Zhang very unhappy because he had to maintain his strength and couldn't slide down as much as he wanted. The surroundings darkened. It wasn't very dark, but felt like dusk. Lei Xingfeng slid down slowly while constantly looking to both sides. Ma Zhang was a bit confused. "What are you looking at?" Lei Xingfeng didn't answer. He continued to slide slowly while looking to both sides. Ma Zhang was influenced by Lei Xingfeng and also started to look around. Although he didn't know why Lei Xingfeng was doing this, he still learned from him and looked to both sides. After descending for about a few hundred meters, Lei Xingfeng saw a black cliff in the distance to the left. It was at least a kilometer away from here. Due to the dim light, It looked like a wall. Lei Xingfeng said, "Follow me." He slid to the left. In fact, whether it was Lei Xingfeng or Ma Zhang, they didn't know anything about this place. The terrain was limited to places they had been to before. Since it led to the fantasy sky realm, even an idiot would know that it wasn't an easy place to walk. They had to be careful. Ma Zhang didn't understand. "Why do we have to move there?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Let's go there first." In fact, he didn't know why he had to go there, but he instinctively wanted to go there. Anyway, he had an indescribable fear of going down, a fear of the complete unknown. After a while, the two black spots on the cliff moved to the left. Rather than saying that they were swimming, it was better to say that they were flying along the cliff. However, this speed had nothing to do with flying. It was just moving slowly. Lei Xingfeng was very patient as he moved slowly on the cliff. He didn't want to fly away from the cliff at all. He had seen too many similar things. He didn't want to be shot down for no reason, just because it was convenient. Ma Zhang had one good point. Although he didn't understand why Lei Xingfeng was doing this, it didn't stop him from learning. As the two of them moved, the black cliff gradually became clearer. It was different from the cliff they were leaning on. This cliff was dark red in color, looking extremely strange. This was the first time Xian Feng had seen a rock of this color. The two gradually moved closer. Then they found that this cliff was about 10 meters away from the cliff they were leaning against. In other words, the two didn't touch, so there was a very wide crack. Lei Xingfeng looked at it and said, "Let's swim up." As he spoke, his body moved along the cliff and reached the top in a moment. At this time, both of them could clearly see that this was a stone beam about 200 meters wide. They didn't know where it extended. One end was suspended in midair, while the other end was deep in the clouds. They couldn't see what it was at all. Ma Zhang said, "Do we jump over, or do we fly over?" Lei Xingfeng thought for a moment and said, "Jump over, don't fly." Ma Zhang suddenly thought of an idea and said, "I have an idea. We don't need to jump or fly." This time, Ma Zhang didn't act on his own. Instead, he said, "Use your real body and climb directly with your hands. The two sides are only about 10 meters away. Climbing up won't be a problem at all." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "That's a good idea. I'll go first." Ma Zhang nodded and said, "Okay, you're stronger than me. It's good that you go first." He didn't mind if someone went first. Lei Xingfeng stuck to the cliff and suddenly released his real body. One of his hands was already on the opposite cliff. With a little effort, he reached the top of the cliff. He instantly withdrew his real body and said loudly, "Okay, it's okay. You can come over. There's no danger." Ma Zhang released his real body and climbed to the opposite cliff. Then he withdrew his real body and said, "I don't know where this cliff leads to." Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know, but it's better than hanging in midair. After all, we're on solid ground." Ma Zhang agreed. He said, "Yes, I didn't feel at ease when I was on the cliff. It's much better now. Oh, the restriction above seems to be silent." Xian Feng listened attentively and spoke. And, as expected, there isn't any sound. Either that person escaped the restriction or died inside. "Let's go. Don't stay here. Let's leave." Actually, there was a hidden danger in his heart. If the guy in the restriction broke free, he might come down here. Since this person had persisted in the restriction for so long, this person's strength should not be underestimated. It was better to avoid meeting him. The two of them quickly ran at the top of the cliff and ran down along the stone beams. The stone beams varied in width. Some places were as wide as 1,000 meters, while others were only a dozen meters wide. It was a very strange place. Ma Zhang exclaimed as he ran, "How long is this?" "Oh my God, it's too long," Lei Xingfeng said lightly. "You haven't seen the real natural moat. That's called long." "Natural moat? What's that?" Ma Zhang asked curiously. Lei Xingfeng said, "A line in the sky. It can go from one continent to another." Ma Zhang said in shock, "How is that possible?" Lei Xingfeng said, "How is it not possible? I've walked through it." Ma Zhang said, "Oh my God, there's such a thing. Is it naturally formed?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head and said, "No, it's man-made. Until now, I still can't figure out what kind of powerful person could build such a thing. Hundreds of thousands of people have died along the way. I'm one of the luckier ones. I finally reached the other side. Mahjong opened his mouth. After a while, he said, "You're powerful." Lei Xingfeng shook his head and sighed, "Powerful, my ass. Once you go up, you won't be able to go back even if you want to. You don't know how long it will be, so you can only brace yourself and move forward. It's really terrible. In the end, there's no water, no food, and especially no water. You know that cultivators can endure hunger, but they can't endure without water. Many people die of thirst." Mahjong didn't understand and said, "Then why do you want to go up? As long as you don't go, there's no danger." Lei Xingfeng said, "You don't understand. This is a great migration." Mahjong nodded in surprise and said, "So it's a great migration. No wonder." Chapter 741. Lei Xingfeng said, "You also know about the Great Migration." Mahjong said, "Of course. This is a phenomenon unique to cultivators. When resources are consumed to a certain extent and can no longer meet the needs of high-level cultivators, then the Great Migration may occur." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, the Great Migration is too cruel. I don't want to go through it again." Mahjong said, "There is nothing cruel about it. If you want to develop and grow, then you must decisively migrate when it's time to migrate." Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly. It was easy to say, but who knew how difficult it would be? The higher the cultivator, the less likely they would be to oppose the migration. The cultivators and ordinary people at the bottom were the ones who were unwilling. But what use would it be if they opposed it? Lei Xingfeng did not want to continue this topic and said, "This stone bridge should not be too long. Let's speed up." Fortunately, they did not see any restrictions or people along the way. It was a smooth journey. After walking for a while, Lei Xingfeng understood that this was an arched stone bridge. It was very long and extended downwards. After walking for a while, the entire stone bridge began to tilt downwards rapidly. The two of them ran faster and faster. After a while, Lei Xingfeng and Mahjong reached the bottom. However, the scene here was still shocking. The surroundings were still blank. They could see huge cracks and a few boulders that looked like platforms. The color of the boulders here was different from the stone bridge. The boulders here were all black. No wonder they could not see above. Sliding down the boulders, Lei Xingfeng finally saw the ground. It was all gravel. The ground was uneven and uneven. There were small ponds on the ground from time to time. However, there were no plants or creatures. It was dead silent. Lei Xingfeng carefully observed for a while and said, "There used to be natural restrictions here, but they were all destroyed. They were completely destroyed. There is no possibility of natural recovery." The characteristic of natural restrictions was that even if 50% or even 60% of them were destroyed, they would gradually recover with the passage of time. However, the restrictions that originally existed here were completely destroyed. It was 99% destroyed. Lei Xingfeng could see some scattered restriction nodes that were useless. Mahjong was startled and said, "There's a restriction here." He was like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bough, and he hated restrictions to the extreme. Lei Xingfeng said, "It has been destroyed. It is no threat to us." Mahjong said, "That's good, that's good. Hee, I am afraid of restrictions." Lei Xingfeng shook his head and said, "There will be many restrictions here. Even if a part of them is destroyed, there will still be some restrictions left." The ground. Sure enough, they did not go far before they saw a few huge stone pits. If they looked carefully, they would find that these were left behind by a fist or palm. Only the real body could release such a terrifying power. Mahjong said in horror, "This guy is terrifyingly strong. I hope we don't meet such an expert. He can kill us with a slap." Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "You will know if you look carefully. These are very old marks." Mahjong realized that they were indeed very old marks. He said, "Alas, I was so dizzy that I didn't notice these marks. They are indeed marks from a long time ago." The two of them walked down the road that was forcibly opened. It was extremely difficult to walk down the road. Fortunately, the two of them were high-level cultivators. Even if they did not dare to fly, This little obstacle could not stop them. Lei Xingfeng stopped and said, "There are more restrictions in front." Ma Zhang sighed and said, "There is no end to it." "Well, since you are here, the restrictions are not scary." Lei Xingfeng said, "Since when are restrictions not scary? If I know the restrictions, then they are not scary. But what if I don't know them? That is absolutely scary." Ma Zhang said, "I hope you know them all." Lei Xingfeng said, "That is absolutely impossible. I have not accumulated so much. This is especially true for natural restrictions. Who knows what will come out of them?" Ma Zhang said, "If you don't know them, then just avoid them." Lei Xingfeng grinned and said, "You are wrong. If you don't know them, then I will study them carefully." Ma Zhang immediately understood and said, "Fine, fine, I won't say anything else. I'll go with you. If you live, I live. If you die, I won't be able to live either." He accepted his fate. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Don't worry. Even if you die, I will not die." Ha! He had the mirror realm in hand, so he was not afraid of any danger. Since he could control the mirror realm, his enemies could not stop him at all. This was the real benefit of controlling the mirror realm. Ma Zhang did not know that Lei Xingfeng had the mirror realm. He said, "I will follow you closely, so I will not die." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, don't die. Let's see what is going on with this restriction." The terrain here was absolutely strange. From time to time, they could see huge cracks. They did not know how deep they were. They could see pieces of ground and strange cliffs that were so high that they could not see the top. From this restriction, it could be seen that this was a remnant restriction area. The other restrictions had been destroyed, and the remaining restriction was only in a corner. It covered an area of about 10 square kilometers, and there were many large cracks in it. The terrain was quite steep. Lei Xingfeng looked back and forth. After a while, he said, "We can ignore this restriction. We can go from the side. This restriction is quite powerful. Well, I still want to explore it." "You don't have to go in." Ma Zhang said, "Huh? You don't have to go in. Then I won't go in." He did not want to enter such a dangerous place. However, Ma Zhang ignored a very important thing. Why did he come in? If he was afraid of danger, he should not have come in from the beginning. Since he came in, he was looking for good things. The good things were obviously covered by the restriction. If he did not go in, he would not be able to get them. Lei Xingfeng stepped directly into the restriction. Silver light flashed in his eyes. He quickly avoided the restriction nodes and walked inside. Ma Zhang waited until Lei Xingfeng walked for about an hour. He suddenly slapped his thigh. He suddenly realized, "Why didn't I go in?" This time, he was looking for materials for himself. If he did not go in, how could he get the materials? At this time, even if Ma Zhang wanted to go in, he could not. Ma Zhang sat down. He was extremely regretful. He kept slapping his head. He was too stupid. He was afraid of death and did not dare to go in. Was he out of his mind? Lei Xingfeng did not think of this. He had always been a collector, especially for high-grade materials. He would do anything to get them. With his current strength, he would consume a lot of normal materials. However, high-grade materials were the foundation of his advancement. Without high-grade materials, he could not improve. This was absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng had to go in. Even if he could not find the materials, he had to go in. If he did not go in, he would definitely regret it. This restriction was also a compound restriction. However, it was not as complicated. The restriction nodes moved relatively slowly. Lei Xingfeng did not walk for long before he suddenly understood. This compound restriction only had one corner. This corner was left behind. After the other restrictions were destroyed, the power of this restriction decreased rapidly. Now, even if the restriction activated, its power was limited. For this reason, Lei Xingfeng's actions were slightly bolder. Even if he touched the restriction nodes, he did not care as long as there were few of them. This created a very interesting phenomenon. The restriction seemed to be about to activate, but because there wasn't enough power to activate it, Xi and Feng didn't touch enough of the restriction nodes, only a few at a time. Once he noticed that the restriction was about to activate, Xi and Feng would stop, preventing the restriction from activating. After walking for about half an hour, Lei Xingfeng walked out of the restriction circle. Then he saw a tree without leaves. It was very strange. There was not a single leaf. There were only branches. The whole tree was like an open folding fan. The branches were all flat. The color of the branches was also very special. At first glance, Lei Xingfeng thought it was a coral. This was the first time Lei Xingfeng saw this thing. He did not know what treasure it was. Lei Xingfeng pondered for a moment. Perhaps it was some kind of strange object? Lei Xingfeng was not an expert when it came to plants. At least, he was not as good as Lei Xingyao. Anyway, Ma Zhang did not follow him. Lei Xingfeng quickly dug out this strange tree and returned to the mirror world in the blink of an eye. Carrying a strange tree that was more than 10 meters tall, Lei Xingfeng appeared in his own courtyard. There were still many people in the courtyard. This was the habit of the hidden sect. When they had nothing to do, they would rather drink and chat in Lei Xingfeng's courtyard under the wooden shed than return to their own homes. This was especially true for the higher-ups. Not only were Wu Yang and Gucci like this, but Thunderstorm, Gao Yi, Jean Dia, Mad Eagle, Tiger Love, and a group of senior and junior brothers were also like this. At this time, many people in the courtyard saw Lei Xingfeng appear with a strange tree. They all stood up curiously and ran to Lei Xingfeng's side to ask questions. Wu Yang was also there. He said, "A phone, what is this?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I really don't know what it is, but I carried it back. Right? Is little sister here?" Wu Yang said, "She was here in the morning, but she went back because she had something to do." He waved his hand to call a disciple and said, "Go and call little sister here." Thunderstorm went up to check and said, "Is this a tree? Why doesn't it look like one?" A group of people circled Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng hurriedly said, "Stop, stop. Don't circle around. Let little sister examine it." Lei Xingfeng erected the strange tree on the ground and called a disciple over. He said, "Hold it, don't let go." Then he let go and said, "Let's talk in the wooden shed." The group of people returned to the wooden shed and sat down. Wu Yang said, "A phone, where did you go? Why did you take so long to come back?" Chapter 742. Lei Xingfeng said, "We went to a very dangerous place, a place that even high-level practitioners want to enter." Wu Yang asked, "Have we already entered?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head. "We shouldn't have. We're still in the outer area. This thing was found in the outer area." Thunderstorm asked, "Is it very dangerous?" Lei Xingfeng nodded. "Very dangerous. If you're not strong enough, don't go." With this sentence, Wu Yang and the others gave up. If Lei Xingfeng said it was dangerous, then it was really dangerous. They all believed that if Lei Xingfeng was willing to bring them in, they didn't need to say anything, Lei Xingfeng would bring them. Since he didn't say anything, then he really couldn't protect everyone's safety. Thunderstorm said, "What a pity." Wu Yang smiled. "There's nothing to pity, as long as a phone can go in." Lei Xingyao walked in from outside. She saw the strange tree in the middle of the courtyard. She couldn't help but be stunned. Then she quickly walked to the side of the strange tree, carefully examining it. After a while, Lei Xingyao used her fingernails to scratch it. She put it in her mouth and tasted it, the suspicion in her eyes growing stronger. Lei Xingfeng raised his voice. "Little sister, what is that? Is it useful?" Actually, he knew that this was a good thing, because in his eyes, this thing was shining. According to his experience, this was the light of a top-grade treasure. Even if he didn't know what it was, it didn't stop him from recognizing it. It was a treasure. Even if Lei Xingyao couldn't see what it was, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't throw it away. He would definitely keep it. Lei Xingyao came to Lei Xingfeng's side, sat down next to him, and said, "I don't know what this thing is, but I know it's a treasure. I have a way to identify it. But the consequences of identifying it are a bit serious." Lei Xingfeng asked, "How do you identify it?" Lei Xingyao said, "According to the training method you gave me, use my wood seal to absorb it. If it can be absorbed and used, then it's a treasure suitable for me." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, if the wood seal can absorb it, then let's absorb it." Lei Xingyao immediately said happily, "Okay." No matter how precious the thing was, if his little sister could use it, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't be stingy. Lei stood in the courtyard. She released her wood seal. In an instant, the strange tree was sucked into it. Not only was it useful, it had great uses, It could even cause her would seal to the heavens, ants would could change. To the heavens and earth. Lei Xingyao, Lei Xingyao's wood, and Xingyao and Lei, Xingyao and the wood. After a while, the wood seal's light dimmed. Lei Xingyao's face clearly showed an anxious expression. Lei Xingfeng flipped his hand. A large piece of energy crystal appeared. He directly threw it at the wood seal. In an instant, the wood seal absorbed the energy crystal. Lei Xingyao immediately showed a relaxed expression. She continuously threw out large pieces of energy crystals, all of which were carefully refined by Lei Xingfeng. Without the help of a certain amount of energy crystals, even if there were treasures, Lei Xingyao's wood seal might not be able to absorb it. Once it was interrupted, it would be a huge blow to Lei Xingyao. This was where Lei Xingfeng's experience lay. Without him, Lei Xingyao would be in danger. After using about 30 pieces of energy crystals, Lei Xingfeng stopped throwing them. It was enough for Lei Xingyao. After all, her cultivation was still relatively low. Lei Xingyao also didn't expect this strange tree to be so useful. Her cultivation began to skyrocket, forcing her to release her true body. Due to the strange tree's effect, her true body also took on the appearance of a large tree. Although it still looked very young, its power was not small at all. Lei Xingfeng was a bit shocked. He said, "High-level Dao monarch. Almost a peak Dao monarch." Wu Yang had already arrived beside Lei Xingfeng. He said in shock, "What?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head. "I really didn't know this strange tree was so powerful. It directly raised my little sister's cultivation to a high-level Dao monarch." Wu Yang was speechless. Lei Xingfeng surpassed him. But with the help of a strange tree, Lei Xingyao surpassed him. It was indeed unbelievable. Thunderstorm was also dumbfounded. He said, "A phone. You're saying that Yao Yao's cultivation is now a high-level Dao monarch?" Lei Xingfeng nodded. "That's right. She's almost a peak Dao monarch." Everyone was stunned. Gucci said, "I know the reason for this. It's to use natural treasures to forcefully raise one's cultivation, but treasures are hard to come by." Lei Xingfeng also remembered chatting with Xingfeng in the past. He said, "This is possible, but the foundation is not stable enough. Let little sister slowly repair it in the future. There are also problems with advancing too quickly." Jean Dia said, "Although there are problems, if it can quickly raise one's cultivation to this level, I'm willing to do it too." Mad Eagle said, "Nonsense, I'm willing too." Wu Yang glanced at the two, said, "With this kind of treasure, you can't absorb it. The seals are too weak." Lei Xingfeng also said, "Yes, little sister's attribute is lucky. The wood attribute has always been very gentle, and if it was fire or metal, it would be very difficult to absorb. It might even kill her." Lei Xingyao finally finished digesting. She said, "It's not just my attribute. It's also because I have spirity. She helped me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to absorb it." Only then did everyone remember that Lei Xingyao had a living spirit item. Lei Xingfeng laughed. No wonder, no wonder. I was wondering how little sister could advance so smoothly, without any danger at all." Xiaoling popped out and sat on Xian Yao's shoulder. Actually, Xian Yao's advancement was even more beneficial to her. She could be considered to have completely parasitized in the wood seal. The wood seal was her home, her only home. If she didn't cherish it, then she would have met a ghost. Lei Xingyao said, "Spirity is amazing. If I release my true body, Spirity will also appear and attack." She said proudly. Spirity raised her small face proudly, but she was really too small. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see her expression, so no one paid attention to her. It was a waste of an expression. Lei Xingfeng said, "Pack me some food. I have to go back." After being delayed for half a day, Lei Xingfeng knew that there might be treasures inside the seal. He couldn't sit still. This kind of heaven-defying treasure could only be found in that kind of strange place. Of course, he wouldn't let it go. When Lei Xingfeng returned, Jean Depan had already organized people to cook all kinds of food. So, when Lei Xingfeng finished speaking, this guy had already brought a group of people over, carrying all kinds of boxes and baskets, and placed them on the ground. Jean de Pan said, "A phone, the things are ready, but the quantity is still a bit lacking. Put them away first. I'll prepare more when you come back." This was the benefit of having a home. Many things were prepared, and as long as he gave the order, everything would be ready. Lei Xingfeng thanked him, put away the food, and left. After returning to the seal, Lei Xingfeng was very happy. This time he had gained a lot. Not only did he get a strange tree, but more importantly, he knew that there were many treasures here for him to collect. Moreover, the mirror world could break through the seal here, and this was also very important. This meant that he wouldn't be trapped by the seal. After a while, Lei Xingfeng walked out of the seal. Ma Zhang was about to go crazy from waiting. He said, "What took you so long?" Lei Xingfeng said with a smile, "It wasn't that long. If we went in together, it would be even slower." Ma Zhang was speechless. He knew that he was a burden to Lei Xingfeng, so he couldn't complain. He said, "Did you find anything?" Lei Xingfeng obviously didn't need to tell him. He smiled and said, "Nothing. Let's keep going." Ma Zhang muttered in his heart. Only a fool would believe that. However, he had no way to prove that Lei Xingfeng had gained something. Besides, even if Lei Xingfeng had gained something, Lei Xingfeng didn't need to share it with him when he wasn't there. The two continued forward. The further they went, the more rugged the path became. Soon, the two found that there was no way to go. There were steep cliffs on 3 sides. Looking down, it was still a blank. Ma Zhang said, "This is the most complicated and confusing terrain I have ever seen. What does it lead to?" Ma Zhang couldn't be blamed for complaining. In fact, Lei Xingfeng also couldn't make sense of it. This terrain was completely illogical. It appeared abruptly, and they couldn't see the sky or the ground. From time to time, they could see traces of the seal. Lei Xingfeng said, "It's going to slide down again. Are you ready?" Ma Zhang looked down and said helplessly, "Of course, I can't turn back. Let's go." The two began to slide down the cliffs. The cliffs here were different. They were greenish-black in color. Lei Xingfeng only took a glance, and his eyes flickered with silver light. He found that the cliffs were also made of some kind of material. It was just that it wasn't of the quality that he collected. Both of them were very fast as they slid down. After a few thousand meters, both of them saw a piece of land. It was neither big nor small, about a few hundred square kilometers. Because they were at a high altitude, it was easy to tell the size of the land. When the two landed on the ground, Lei Xingfeng said, "Damn, this was originally a large seal. Now most of it has been destroyed. There are still some seals left." Ma Zhang was also numb. He said, "It's not strange that there are seals. It would be strange if there weren't." Lei Xingfeng looked carefully again and said, "The seals on both sides are still there. The seal in the middle is completely destroyed. It seems to have recovered a little, but it doesn't pose a threat. This was originally a large compound seal. To be able to break this seal and even open a path, this person is amazing." Ma Zhang said, "Maybe it's not the work of one person. Maybe it's the work of several people." Lei Xingfeng said, "Without absolute strength, the number of people doesn't affect the seal much." Chapter 743. Ma Zhang said, Okay, I don't know about this. What do we do now? Go through?" Lei Xingfeng shook his head. "No, I want to enter the seal." Ma Zhang said, "Here we go again. I'll go with you." Lei Xingfeng laughed. "I'm not bringing you in." Ma Zhang said angrily, "Why not?" Lei Xingfeng shook his finger. "You're a burden. Why should I bring you in and protect you? It's troublesome." Ma Zhang was flustered and exasperated. At this point, he understood that there must be something good in the seal. If not, Exine Phone wouldn't have refused to bring him along. If he did, he would have to take a share, which no one would agree to. "No, you have to bring me along." Lei Xingfeng curled his lips and said, "There are seals on both sides. You explore the left, and I'll explore the right. It's an equal opportunity." Ma Zhang said, "But I don't know anything about seals." Lei Xingfeng said indifferently, "That's none of my business." Ma Zhang was choked to the point of rolling his eyes. Thinking about it, what did this have to do with Exine Foam? The two of them were just temporary partners, there was no need for Exine Feng to give in to him. Being able to protect him to this point was already not bad. Ma Zhang put on a flattering smile and said, "A Feng, a Feng." Lei Xingfeng's hair stood on end. He scolded, "Get lost. Don't do this." If he did not do this, then what else could he do? Ma Zhang was forced. If he wanted to go in, he had to beg Lei Xingfeng. But since he did not want to bring him, he could only pester him. Lei Xingfeng also had a headache. This guy was shameless. What else could he do? Ma Zhang blocked in front of Lei Xingfeng and begged. After a while, he realized why Lei Xingfeng was so determined not to bring him. He said, "Give me a small share of whatever you find inside. Just a small share is enough. You can't let me come here for nothing." Exine Feng continued to chuckle. Ma Zhang wanted to smash his smiling face into pieces. Too despicable. Wasn't he mocking him for being useless? Ma Zhang could only swallow his anger. "A Feng, no, little brother. Brother Lei, take me, I beg you." Lei Xingfeng said, "A cultivator must have his own backbone. It's not good to ask for help." Ma Zhang almost vomited blood. These words were too shameful. He wanted to say unyieldingly, "I'm not going." But thinking of the possibility of a wasted trip, he became terrified. Furthermore, he didn't come here just for the materials. He had other things to do, and he had to rely on Exine Feng to enter. Ma Zhang said, "Hey, I have my own backbone. Please take me in." Lei Xingfeng rolled his eyes. This guy was shameless. Anyway, if he didn't bring him, he would pester endlessly. Ever since Lei Xingfeng saw how precious the strange tree was, he really didn't want to bring this guy in. The things that were produced here were too rare and hard to find. Some of the materials were not only for his own use. He also had a big secret sect behind him. There were many cultivators inside, but they lacked food and clothing. No, they lacked all kinds of cultivation materials. Lei Xingfeng sneered. "Do you think it's useful to beg like this?" Ma Zhang said, "Why not? Maybe you'll agree." Lei Xingfeng said, "If begging is useful, then why are you still cultivating?" Ma Zhang was forced to say, Okay, take me in. I don't want anything. I'll see if it works." He said confidently. Lei Xingfeng said, "You don't want anything? You won't regret it?" Ma Zhang was completely sure that there were good things in the seal. He was really gritting his teeth. Unfortunately, he was not as strong as the other party and had to rely on him in all aspects. Even if he was not convinced, what could he do? The other party didn't care about him at all. He gritted his teeth and said, "I won't regret it." Lei Xingfeng said, "Okay, since you're begging me so sincerely, I'll take you in." Ma Zhang almost spat out blood. This was really bullying. He said, "I'll follow you." Only then did Exine Feng enter the forbidden area. Actually, entering the forbidden area wasn't without a price. He had to constantly fill his eyes with lightning. This was definitely not a good feeling. After a long time, tears would flow down his face. Luckily, there were no problems with his eyes. The more he used them, the better his eyes became. This made Lei Xingfeng very satisfied. At most, when he used his eyes too much, he would cry. There were no other problems. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to use his eyes so recklessly. After this compound seal was destroyed, its power was no longer a threat. Even so, Lei Xingfeng did not plan to trigger it. He carefully avoided the seal nodes and quickly came to an empty space. This was a blank spot in the seal. There were a few bamboo shoots on the ground. These were not real bamboo shoots, but something that looked like bamboo shoots. There were a total of 5 of them. The top was sharp, the bottom was thick, and they were conical. Lei Xingfeng was shocked. There really was something. He raised his hand and put the 5 1-meter-tall bamboo shoots into his hidden lens space. Lei Xingfeng did not even have time to look carefully. Ma Zhang was one step slower. The things were already taken by Lei Xingfeng. He was so angry that he shouted, Hey, you can't do this. I didn't ask for it. Take it out and let me see. I don't even know what it is." Lei Xingfeng said, "I don't know what it is either. Maybe it's something worthless. Let's go." Ma Zhang grabbed Lei Xingfeng's sleeve and said, "Hey, you can't bully people like this. Let me see. I didn't ask for it. I just want to take a look." Lei Xingfeng thought for a while and said, "Okay, let's take a look. Actually, He was also a bit curious because he had never seen this kind of thing before. Mahjong was dying of curiosity. If it was very precious, then it proved that entering this place was a wise decision. Lei Xingfeng was also very curious. He took out a conical bamboo shoot-like thing. First of all, this thing had a layer of gray-white shell. One could vaguely feel some kind of fluctuation inside. This thing was 1 meter long and as thick as a thigh. It had a rough gray-white surface. It looked unremarkable, but Lei Xingfeng knew in his heart that anything that appeared here would not be bad. Mahjong reached out and took it. He looked carefully and said, "Can you remove this shell?" Lei Xingfeng said, "No. Who knows what's inside? What if it's liquid? What if it's not in contact with air? Who knows what will happen if we open it?" Mahjong could not force it open. He reluctantly returned it to Lei Xingfeng and said, "It's a pity. I don't know what's inside." Lei Xingfeng put it away. It was not good to provoke him at this time. He said, "Let's continue. There should be a lot of things in this seal." Mahjong was very uncomfortable. If he followed, he would not gain anything. If he did not follow, he would not even know what Lei Xingfeng had gained. He was really at a loss. He sighed and said, "Okay, let's continue." The two of them continued forward. In fact, Lei Xingfeng was also wandering aimlessly in the seal. He did not know where the treasures were. The only thing he knew was that there were often very small empty spaces in the seal. Unless you completely destroyed the seal, you would not be able to find out where the good things were. Now, Lei Xingfeng could not think of a way to find the empty spaces. He used his vision skill. This place was full of seals. All kinds of seal nodes emitted light that blocked his vision. Of course, if he got close, he would still discover it. They found a second empty space, but this time there was nothing. Lei Xingfeng was not surprised. If there were both, he would feel strange. Mahjong muttered as he followed. He was still regretting. How could there be nothing? How could there be nothing? It was really a pity. Lei Xingfeng said curiously, "Even if there is, it has nothing to do with you. What are you regretting?" Mahjong had his own ideas. He thought that if Lei Xingfeng collected a lot, he would be able to slip a little through the gaps between his fingers. Then he would have profited. If Lei Xingfeng collected less, it would be very difficult for him to get more. After finding 2 empty spaces in a row and finding nothing, Lei Xingfeng said, "You see, it's just you following. There's nothing." Mahjong did not say anything. He could not speak and just followed dejectedly. Anyway, whatever Lei Xingfeng said, he did not care. He just followed. After a while, Lei Xingfeng found another bamboo shoot field. There were more than 30 of them. Lei Xingfeng hurriedly cleaned them up. Mahjong did not dare to do anything. If he angered Lei Xingfeng, he would not be able to handle it. Not to mention other things. If Lei Xingfeng turned and left, he would not be able to handle it. He could only watch helplessly. This time, Lei Xingfeng did not finish collecting. He collected 25, and there were 7 left. He said, "This is for you." Mahjong was extremely surprised. He said, "Ah? For me? Are you serious?" Lei Xingfeng said, "You don't want it? If you don't, I'll keep it," he said as he made a gesture. Only then did Mahjong react. He shouted, "I want it! I want it! Don't move, it's all mine!" Ha! Overjoyed, this guy did not have any elegance at all. He laughed loudly. The surprise came too suddenly. If Lei Xingfeng had agreed to give it to him from the start, it was certain that this guy would not be too grateful. But now, he would be very grateful. Sometimes, people were just cheap. Lei Xingfeng knew this very well. Mahjong happily kept the 7 stalagmites. This guy was much more reckless than Lei Xingfeng. He used his hand to pinch, and the shell on the surface of the stalagmite opened. Following a cracking sound, the grayish-white shell peeled off. Lei Xingfeng was at the side, so he saw it very clearly. He said, energy crystal?" The surging energy was almost undisguised. Lei Xingfeng also took out a stalagmite. He peeled off the grayish-white shell, revealing the crystal that was overflowing with colorful light. This crystal had an indescribable luster, and the energy it contained was completely different from the natural crystals that Lei Xingfeng had condensed himself. At this time, he also realized that if this energy crystal was used for advancement, One stalagmite would be equivalent to 10 large crystals that he had condensed himself. He could not help but sigh. Amazing stalagmite. Chapter 744. Ma Zhang's eyes turned green as he stored the stalagmite into his hidden Luan space like it was a treasure. You can't take it back. Lei Xingfeng said, Do I want it? Oomph. With a snort, Ma Zhang broke out in cold sweat. Only then did he remember that if Exine Feng didn't give it to him, where would he have found such a high-quality energy crystal? He immediately plastered a smile on his face, putting on a fawning look as he subconsciously chuckled. This image was as wretched as it could get. Lei Xingfeng shook his head, but he could understand. These were good things that high-level cultivators could use, so Ma Zhang's reaction wasn't unexpected. Lei Xingfeng said, Since this place produces these energy stalagmites, let's continue looking. Ma Zhang said carefully, You'll give me a little, just a little. Lei Xingfeng said, It depends. If I have enough, I'll leave some for you. But how could this treasure be enough? It was true that the more, the better. Ma Zhang smiled. He didn't know that from the beginning until now, his status had dropped bit by bit. Until now, he had no status at all. Everything was decided by Lei Xingfeng. This was strength speaking, who told him to do nothing but listen, and couldn't help Lei Xingfeng at all. Although this half of the area wasn't very large, it would still take a considerable amount of time to truly walk around it. However, under the stimulation of the stalagmite, the two of them were in high spirits as they wandered around the restriction. Exine Feng calculated and couldn't help but jump in fright. He spoke, Don't touch the restriction. Ma Zhang said, I know, but why did you suddenly think of this? Lei Xingfeng said, I suddenly understood. These stalagmites, once the restriction is triggered, these stalagmites will all be crushed. If you force your way in, you won't get anything. Ma Zhang reacted quickly. He said, Then this restriction was triggered a long time ago and hasn't been touched since? Lei Xingfeng nodded. That's right. It hasn't been triggered for a long time. These stalagmites are forced out by the energy crystals underground. Ma Zhang said, There's a natural energy crystal mine underground? Lei Xingfeng said, That's not necessarily true. There must be energy crystals, or else it wouldn't be able to maintain such a large restriction. It's just whether or not it can be harvested. The restriction above isn't for decoration. If you choose to destroy the restriction and dig for the energy crystals underground, it might not be worth digging for. Are you still planning on digging? Ma Zhang said innocently, I'm not planning on digging. I'm just saying there might be energy crystals underground. Lei Xingfeng said, Without a certain amount of energy crystals, how will the restriction here work? Ma Zhang smiled bitterly. All right, I'll listen to you. If it was a debate, he wouldn't be able to do it either. Who asked him to not know anything about restrictions? Actually, he did know a bit about restrictions, but he was far from Exine Feng's level. Adding on the fact that the restrictions here were too complicated, without profound knowledge, one wouldn't even be able to understand them, much less break them. The two continued to wander through the restriction. They had walked through most of the restriction on this side and collected many stalagmites of different sizes. The largest was 2 meters long, and the smallest was only a palm tall. Lei Xingfeng collected most of them and gave a small portion to Ma Zhang. After leaving the restriction, Lei Xingfeng entered the restriction on the other side. This time, Ma Zhang shamelessly followed. Lei Xingfeng didn't mind. Ma Zhang wasn't useless. Once they met an enemy, Ma Zhang was a very good assistant. 2 people working together was always better than 1 person. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't be too stingy and would still give him a portion. The restriction on the other side was more or less the same. Stalagmites were produced. Searching back and forth in the restriction, the two didn't have any impatience. This was the purpose of entering. If they could find valuable materials, everything would be worth it. Lei Xingfeng also tried to use Lei Yin to collect an energy crystal that peeled off the stalagmite's shell. Only then did he realize that it was definitely a good item. It could instantly replenish Lei Yin's energy. Furthermore, when it was depleted, the stalagmite could also replenish the temporarily depleted energy in a timely manner. It was like a super battery. Mahjong also used his seal to collect a stalagmite. The effect was even better than Lei Xingfeng's. This was because his seal had always been lacking in energy. He didn't have a high-performance energy crystal, so his strength instantly increased by a level. Although he didn't step into the middle-class monarch rank, his battle strength was completely different. He could finally fully unleash the strength of a low-class monarch. Mahjong was still a little upset that Lei Xingfeng had taken away most of the stalagmites. However, he knew that if it wasn't for Lei Xingfeng, he wouldn't have been able to get a single stalagmite. If he entered the restriction, he would definitely trigger the restriction to explode. When that happened, there wouldn't be any stalagmites left. He could only follow Lei Xingfeng. This was something that Mahjong was very upset about. However, no matter how upset he was, he had to follow. Otherwise, the consequences would be dire. Mahjong said in his heart, I'll endure. I'll endure. Lei Xingfeng knew that Mahjong was upset. Fortunately, the two of them were temporary partners. If this fella really went overboard, he could ditch Mahjong at any time and do it alone. Therefore, he didn't mind too much. After walking out of the restriction, Lei Xingfeng looked around. After a while, he said, Let's follow this path. Since someone broke through this restriction, he must have come from a certain path. Mahjong said, But if we follow that person's path, he would have taken all the good stuff. To Mahjong, following Lei Xingfeng was like eating leftovers. However, if they followed Lei Xingfeng's path, then Lei Xingfeng would only get leftovers. How much could he get if he followed? Therefore, he wasn't willing to follow this path. Lei Xingfeng thought that it made sense. He said, How do you plan to go? Mahjong was also at a loss. There was only one path here. They could either go back or go forward. He said, Well, let's walk for a while first. If we see any other paths, then we'll go. Lei Xingfeng said, All right, let's go first. Actually, he agreed with Mahjong's words. If they followed the path taken by someone else, then the good stuff along the way would probably be gone. Even if there would be problems with the quantity and quality. Lei Xingfeng had collected more than 130 stalagmites in the two restriction areas just now. Among them, there were less than 50 stalagmites that were more than a meter tall. If no one had forcefully opened a path, then he believed that the entire restriction would be filled with these stalagmites. However, Lei Xingfeng also admired the person who rushed the formation. This person's strength was frighteningly strong. It wasn't that this compound restriction was very strong. However, once this restriction formation was triggered, the stalagmites would all be destroyed. The energy would all be used by the restriction formation. With such a terrifying explosion, that person could still open a path. In any case, Lei Xingfeng didn't want to meet such an expert. He felt that this person must be stronger than Xingfeng. Another stone beam appeared. This time, the stone beam was very narrow. The narrowest part was only 10 centimeters wide. It was like a knife in the air. The two of them walked over with difficulty. A large piece of land suddenly appeared. The end of the stone beam was resting on top of it. Before it could descend to the ground, a gust of wind blew by. The fog that covered the land dissipated a little, and they could barely see the ground. Lei Xingfeng stood on the stone beam. He kept sucking in cold air and said, Hiss! What kind of restriction is this? The range is too wide. How they set it up? No, this is natural. Holy shit, natural restrictions can be like this? The more he observed, the more shocked he was. He couldn't understand it at all. Natural restrictions? This was definitely not a natural restriction. However, he couldn't see any traces of artificial placement. The entire restriction area was completely natural. Even if Lei Xingfeng was extraordinary in restriction, he still felt dizzy. Mahjong said, What's wrong? Lei Xingfeng said, very seriously, The restrictions below are very powerful. I can't even understand some of them. Mahjong immediately understood Lei Xingfeng's meaning. He said, You can't leave me behind. Lei Xingfeng said, I'm not leaving you behind. However, you can't follow me in. This time I'm serious. It's too complicated. I don't even have the confidence to deal with it. If you follow me in, the chances of triggering the restriction are very high. At that time, I won't be able to take care of your safety. Ma Zhang stared at Lei Xingfeng. He found that this time, Lei Xingfeng's expression was extremely serious. There was no teasing or sarcasm like before. It seemed that he was really serious. Lei Xingfeng also stared at Ma Zhang. Some words had to be said up front. Otherwise, their partnership would be over. Ma Zhang thought for a moment. He was very conflicted. Lei Xingfeng's words were very clear. If he insisted on following him in, once he triggered the restriction, Lei Xingfeng wouldn't care. He would prioritize escaping. Now, he was very clear that the restriction here was very powerful. At that time, whether he could withstand it or not was a big problem. If he couldn't withstand it, it was very likely that he would die in the restriction. But if he didn't follow Xian Feng, then he wouldn't be able to obtain any benefits. Ma Zhang didn't know what to do, to protect his life or to obtain benefits. After a while, Ma Zhang thought of a reason and said, But, if I don't follow you, you can break through this restriction. How can I go over? Lei Xingfeng said, Someone has already opened a path. If you follow the path, even if some of the restriction is restored, it won't stop you. You just have to rush over. Ma Zhang finally understood. Staying alive was the most important thing. If he died in the restriction, then he would have nothing. As for the benefits of the restriction, they could only be enjoyed if he was alive. If he was dead, even if he obtained the benefits, who would use them? Ma Zhang smiled bitterly and said, Okay, I'll go by myself. However, I don't know how to go through this path. He couldn't see the restriction notes. Of course, he didn't know where the passage that was forcibly opened was. Chapter 745. Lei Xingfeng said, That's easy. I'll take you for a while, and then I'll enter the restriction formation. You wait. After I'm done exploring, I'll come out and take you for a while. Once Ma Zhang had determined the path he wanted to take, he felt a lot more relaxed. However, he was still a little unwilling. He said, If you get something good in the restriction formation that you don't like, you can give it to me. Lei Xingfeng thought for a while and said with a smile, Okay, I agree. He still needed to win this guy over. Ma Zhang immediately became happy. If he could get something without going through danger, he would always be happy. Of course, the good stuff had nothing to do with him. Even so, he was still quite satisfied. After all, it was better than nothing. Lei Xingfeng led Ma Zhang along a path and quickly moved forward. After a few thousand meters, they came to a big pit. Lei Xingfeng said, You wait here. Ordinary people can't find this place. If they want to pass through, they either have to force their way through, or they can't pass through. Generally, they can't find this path. Ma Zhang agreed and sat down. He said, Don't delay for too long. You don't know that waiting for someone is really a kind of torture. Lei Xingfeng didn't say anything. He turned around and entered the restriction formation. Ma Zhang looked at Lei Xingfeng's disappearing figure and sighed. He made up his mind that if he had time in the future, he would definitely learn about restriction formations. Even if he couldn't master it, he would at least learn a little. He wouldn't be at a disadvantage if he didn't know anything. Lei Xingfeng finally got rid of Ma Zhang's entanglement for the time being. He walked all the way into the depths of the restriction formation. This restriction formation was quite complicated. Because this large restriction formation had been forcibly opened up by someone, its power had actually decreased a lot. At that time, that person probably couldn't get anything from this restriction formation, so he directly rushed through it. The consequence of rushing through was that a small part of this extremely powerful restriction formation was destroyed. Because of this small part, the power of the entire restriction formation had decreased rapidly. At least 30 to 40% of its power was reduced. This gave Lei Xingfeng a very good opportunity. Lei Xingfeng was looking forward to seeing what was inside the formation. Now he understood a little bit. The formation of this restriction formation was actually formed naturally by relying on treasures. However, he couldn't understand why this situation would occur. This wasn't man-made. He was completely sure that this wasn't the means of human cultivators. What a wonderful place. There were restrictions everywhere. There were treasures everywhere. It all depended on whether you had the ability to collect them. Lei Xingfeng discovered a pattern. The better the item, the higher the level of the restriction formation. If he wasn't proficient in restriction formations, he probably wouldn't be able to get out of some of the restrictions. Even if he did, his vitality would be greatly damaged. In such a dangerous place, once he was injured, the danger level would increase rapidly. It would be difficult to leave safely. Of course, this problem didn't apply to Lei Xingfeng. He had the mirror realm to escape. As long as he didn't die, there was hope for him to survive. This was a good restriction formation. What made Lei Xingfeng the happiest was that someone had done the preliminary work, but didn't get anything and left directly. He came in and took advantage of it. As expected, not long after, Lei Xingfeng found stalagmites that were 2 meters and even 6 to 7 meters tall. These were different from the stalagmites from before. The energy contained in these stalagmites was much purer. This meant that after the person forcefully broke through the restriction, he didn't stop at all and forced his way through. Therefore, the restriction formation still retained the treasures from before. Along the way, Lei Xingfeng opened his eyes. He collected large stalagmites. Of course, there weren't only energy stalagmites here. There were also other treasures. As cultivation required too many materials, no matter how many things Lei Xingfeng found, he never felt that it was enough. Every time he cultivated Lei Yin, he always felt that it wasn't enough. Every time he saw Lei Yin devouring materials, Lei Xingfeng would feel fear. It was like a bottomless pit. Therefore, he didn't spare any effort to collect materials. He searched desperately and collected as many as he could into his hidden Lun space. Especially after cultivating to the monarch rank, Lei Xingfeng finally understood why those experts didn't appear. They only needed to search for materials for cultivation, and that was enough to make them unable to be distracted. This process of searching accompanied high-level cultivators for their entire lives. They would never stop searching for materials and cultivating. Once the materials couldn't keep up, their cultivation would stop and their lives would end. This was why high-level cultivators had to be on the road forever. In this restriction, Lei Xingfeng found 7 high-level cultivation materials. Each of them was extremely rare. Moreover, Lei Xingfeng didn't recognize most of them. However, he knew that they were all good stuff. As for whether he could use these materials, he just had to test them with Lei Yin to know. As long as they were useful, Lei Xingfeng would naturally absorb them. This was also a high-level cultivator. He would collect all kinds of materials. Even if he didn't recognize them, his seal wouldn't lie to him. At the monarch rank, the cultivator's seal would evolve on its own. Of course, the materials would still need to be found by the owner, and they would have to go through a certain amount of purification. There was no need to think about the quantity required. If any cultivator knew that they would need a lifetime's worth of materials, they probably wouldn't have the confidence to continue cultivating. Everyone would take one step at a time and try their best to advance. Lei Xingfeng also didn't dare to think too much. He just collected with all his might. Fortunately, he liked to collect and was used to it. This was related to his personal interests. He had a serious collecting addiction. Running back and forth in the restriction, he began to look for the pattern. Generally speaking, places where there were more changes in the restriction were active would usually have treasures. After grasping this pattern, Lei Xingfeng's harvest began to grow. During this period, Lei Xingfeng even ran to Ma Zhang's side and led him for a while before running to the opposite restriction area. Ever since he found the pattern, Lei Xingfeng didn't have to run around. After observing carefully, he could roughly determine the location of the treasures. This saved him a lot of time. As if he had become an accurate mining expert again, Lei Xingfeng accurately found the location of the treasures one by one. He happily collected his spoils of war. Although there weren't many things here, every single one of them was exceptionally precious. One had to know that among the high-level cultivators who came here, very few were proficient in restrictions. Most of them relied on their powerful strength to barge in. One could imagine how much they would gain. As he walked, Lei Xingfeng suddenly stopped in his tracks. His eyes stared at the right side. The restriction nodes there were extremely active and moving at an extremely fast speed. In other words, it was very difficult to barge in without disturbing the restriction. However, to Lei Xingfeng, this was tantamount to finding a gold mine. The more active the restriction nodes were, the better the items. This was something that he had tested many times. Lei Xingfeng was instantly excited. What kind of treasure was born here? After observing carefully, Lei Xingfeng found that there was no way to enter. After circling around the periphery, he still couldn't find a direct path to enter. He had to observe and test it. Perhaps he could find a way to enter without touching the restriction nodes. This was a challenge. After winding his way to the front, Lei Xingfeng kept charging lightning into his eyes. He carefully observed the restriction nodes and observed the movement patterns of the restriction nodes. Slowly, he found a certain pattern. According to his understanding, there was a pattern to the movement of the restriction nodes. As long as there was a pattern, he would have a way to enter. As long as he could find a space for people to pass through and avoid the moving restriction nodes, he would be able to enter smoothly without touching the restriction nodes. This was Lei Xingfeng's goal. Carefully moving forward and backward, jumping or crouching on the ground, it was as if he was avoiding ghosts. If there were outsiders here, they would be surprised because they couldn't see the restriction nodes. They would see a person inexplicably lowering his head, suddenly retreating, and then suddenly leaping a short distance. His dancing appearance was enough to make people laugh to death. However, Lei Xingfeng knew that once he accidentally touched a few restriction nodes, the restriction would explode. Even if he could deal with it, after the restriction exploded, who knew if it would destroy the treasure? This was what he was most worried about. Since he had observed the movement patterns of the restriction, Lei Xingfeng relied on patience and a little bit of luck to enter the restriction empty spot safely. This restriction empty spot wasn't big. It was at most 100 square meters. The ground was very strange. It was cyan in color. The middle of the ground was as smooth as a mirror. The surroundings were rougher. There was nothing on the ground. It was just an empty space. Lei Xingfeng was stunned. Immediately, he filled his eyes with lightning. In an instant, he was even more stunned. The light on the ground was as bright as the sun. It was so bright that he had to disperse the lightning in his eyes. He knew that he had found a real treasure this time. Although he didn't know what it was, he knew in his heart that it was extremely precious. The color of the ground was actually different. The edges were green or even emerald green. The surface was rough. The closer to the center, the more cyan it was. About 5 or 6 square meters in the center, the color was pure cyan. It was suffused with a faint treasure light. Lei Xingfeng came to the edge first. He took out an iron hammer and gently knocked on the ground. With a series of cracking sounds, dense spider patterns appeared on the ground. Then he saw about 1 square meter of the ground shatter into pieces. It was as if he had knocked on glass with a hammer. The size of the fragments was actually very uniform. Each piece was the size of a finger. The layer of material on the ground wasn't thick. It was only the thickness of a thumb. Below the fragments was the grayish-white ground. First, he circled around and knocked on the ground. The surrounding fragments were all collected by Lei Xingfeng. He specially stored them in wooden boxes. He collected a total of 7 or 8 boxes. Then, he narrowed the circle until the cyan color in the center. This was the treasure that Lei Xingfeng really wanted to collect. Chapter 746. This time, Lei Xingfeng didn't use a hammer, but clenched his fist and hit the ground. The effect was quite good. The ground also cracked, forming spider patterns. These blue fragments were smaller. When the spider patterns extended, the ground completely shattered, forming small fragments the size of rice grains. Each of them was bright and transparent, similar to broken blue glass. Lei Xingfeng carefully put them away. He didn't want to miss a single fragment. Who knew what these things were used for? Anyway, he would collect them all, leaving nothing behind. As he collected them, he rejoiced. Fortunately, he was careful when he came in. If the restrictions were activated, then as long as the restrictions swept in, these things wouldn't exist. They would definitely be annihilated by the power of the restrictions. Thus, there were some treasures that would be preserved even when the restrictions were activated, accounting for about 40% of the treasures. There were also some weaker treasures that accounted for about 30% of the treasures. These treasures could be obtained by those who were strong and fast. The hardest to obtain were the ones that Xian Feng was currently collecting. Once the restrictions were activated, they would basically turn into ashes. After a few years, these treasures would recondense again. As for this portion of treasures, their preciousness was truly of the highest quality among restrictions. Just like Lei Xingfeng's harvest this time. He didn't know how precious they were, but this didn't stop him from carefully collecting them and carefully storing them away. Once he collected everything, Lei Xingfeng immediately left. And the way to leave was to use the mirror realm. He didn't want to spend a long time leaving, so he directly used the mirror realm to come to this empty spot surrounded by restriction nodes. Looking back at the restriction, Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but smile. Although he didn't know how precious the treasures were, he knew that he had obtained another treasure. This time, he basically swept away all the treasures in the restrictions. Even if there were some that were left, there were very few. Because Lei Xingfeng discovered the rules of the restrictions, he was able to find most of the empty spots. Lei Xingfeng did not expect to be able to take away all the treasures within the restriction. He knew that there were many more things in front of him, so he did not want to waste too much time here. When he returned to Ma Zhang's side, he saw him looking at Lei Xingfeng pitifully like a starving puppy. Lei Xingfeng felt goosebumps all over his body. Why is an old man like you trying to act cute? Ma Zhang put on an envious expression and said, "You're back." As he spoke, he reached out his hand, hoping to obtain some treasures. Lei Xingfeng casually took out a piece of delicious braised meat and placed it in Ma Zhang's hand. "Hungry? Let's eat." As he spoke, he also took out a piece of meat and began to eat. He said, "I'm starving to death. All right, let's leave this place." Ma Zhang looked at the braised meat in his hand and almost cried. How could they bully him like this? When he was waiting here, he had already eaten his fill. How could he be hungry? Seeing Lei Xingfeng stride forward, he hurriedly followed and repeatedly said, Hey, I'm not hungry." Lei Xingfeng saw him reach out his hand and grab the braised meat. "Not hungry? All right, I'll eat." "All right, hurry up and follow me. It's not safe here." Ma Zhang was so anxious that he wanted to stomp his feet, but he could not act shamelessly. He could only run after him. As he ran, he said, "A phone. Hey, if you go there, there will be many benefits. Give me a little will do, right?" Lei Xingfeng very innocently turned his head to look at him and said, "What benefits? Do I owe you something? How come I don't remember?" Ma Zhang angrily stared at Lei Xingfeng, but he really had nothing to say. Lei Xingfeng really did not owe him anything. Moreover, he had brought him into this treasure land. If he could not get the treasure, he really could not blame him. It was his own fault for not having the ability. However, he still could not accept it. He could not accept it no matter what. He could only watch Lei Xingfeng get rich while he did not even get a single strand of hair. Of course, he would feel uncomfortable. Lei Xingfeng laughed. In fact, he had already given Ma Zhang some things and deliberately put them aside, intending to give them to Ma Zhang. However, he was not willing to give up so much. He knew the weakness of people. Once Ma Zhang got used to getting things, once he encountered a real treasure that Lei Xingfeng needed, would he not give it up? This would only make Ma Zhang angry. He knew too well about the saying, once you've gained something, you've gained something. Lei Xingfeng could not let Ma Zhang take things for granted. Otherwise, if he gave them to an enemy, it would be too sullen. Just based on this point, Lei Xingfeng would not readily give them to him. He had to tease him and make him feel that it was not easy to get something. It was better than giving it to him when he asked for it, but not giving it to him. Ma Zhang was really at his wit's end. He could not beat Lei Xingfeng, let alone snatch it. After thinking for a long time, Ma Zhang still could not find a reason why Lei Xingfeng would give him materials. A temporary partner, a passerby who was not a friend. He suddenly understood that Lei Xingfeng had no obligation to give him anything. Ma Zhang hung his head dejectedly and said, Okay, forget it. Next time, even if it's dangerous, I will still follow you." Lei Xingfeng did not say anything. Actually, bringing him into the restriction would also be a burden. However, why did he bring him along? Lei Xingfeng had his own plans. The two of them quickly walked through the restriction circle. Using the path opened by others, they smoothly left the restriction circle. Just a few minutes after the two of them stepped out of the restriction circle, which was about a few hundred meters away from the restriction circle behind them suddenly activated. Mahjong looked back, dumbfounded. He said, "That's strange. Why did the restriction circle suddenly activate?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Nonsense. The restriction circle would not activate for no reason. Someone came in." Mahjong said, "Who?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Nonsense. I know who it is. However, I'm guessing that it's someone who has been messing around since we first came in. Maybe there's more than one." Mahjong was a little flustered. One must know that his strength was at the bottom of this land. Anyone could bully him. When he first came in with Lei Xingfeng, he relied on the fact that Lei Xingfeng was a restriction grandmaster to reach this step. Once he met an unreasonable person who bullied the weak or even killed him on sight, he would be helpless. "What should we do?" Lei Xingfeng said. "What's wrong? Are you scared?" Mahjong was not to be outdone. Who's scared? I'm not scared." However, his tone still revealed a sense of guilt. Lei Xingfeng said, "They can't keep up with us. If we force our way through every restriction circle, their speed is not worth mentioning at all. If we didn't stay in a restriction circle for too long, they wouldn't be able to catch up with us. Since they can't catch up with us, what's there to be afraid of?" Mahjong secretly let out a long breath. He was really scared. He was afraid that he would not be able to get out again. He said, "Okay, let's go quickly." This sentence completely exposed the nature of his guilty conscience. Lei Xingfeng laughed and said, "Okay, let's go." The two of them quickly left. The terrain here was really strange to the extreme. It couldn't be understood with common sense. For example, Lei Xingfeng and Mahjong saw a huge lake, or rather a sea. It really stretched as far as the eye could see. However, the surface of the water was dotted with islands. It was densely packed and made people feel uncomfortable. Mahjong saw countless small islands that looked like black sesame seeds. However, Lei Xingfeng saw something completely different. They were all restrictions, densely packed restrictions. Every small island had a restriction, and the restrictions were even connected to each other, forming a super large compound restriction circle. After a while, Lei Xingfeng said, "This is probably the fantasy sky realm." Mahjong said, Maybe it is." He couldn't be sure at all. Lei Xingfeng also couldn't understand. However, when the two of them walked to the edge of the water, they immediately confirmed that this was the fantasy sky realm, because there was no water. There wasn't even a drop of water. It was a reflection formed by the restrictions. It looked like a lake or sea, but when they walked to the edge, they knew that it was neither lake nor sea. The most amazing thing was that there was no water at all. Mahjong said in shock, "There's no water? Heavens, this is too scary. It definitely looks like water from afar." Lei Xingfeng said, "This is formed by restrictions. The outside is completely different from the inside. This place, even though I didn't go in, I can see that it's extremely dangerous." Mahjong's limbs were really numb. He muttered, Can I go in with you?" Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Yes, but I can't guarantee your safety." Mahjong said in fear, "Then can I leave?" Lei Xingfeng still nodded and said, "You can leave. You can leave using your own secret door. However, you can't use your own secret door when you go in. In other words, if you go in, your life or death will depend on your strength. Also, I have to warn you, the restrictions inside are three-dimensional and omnidirectional. It's completely different from the restrictions we saw before. The world inside is also completely different from the outside." Lei Xingfeng stared at Mahjong and said, "Do you still want to go in?" Mahjong's heart was extremely conflicted. This was a chance to get rich, but also a chance to lose his life. His heart was filled with hatred, not hatred towards Xian Feng, but hatred towards himself for not having enough strength. In his hometown, his strength was already at the peak, but here it was not enough. If he was proficient in restrictions, then there would be some hope, but unfortunately, he was not proficient. The restrictions he had learned were all the basics of the basics. Looking at the restrictions here was like reading a heavenly book. Other than not being able to understand it, he still couldn't understand it. Lei Xingfeng wasn't in a hurry. It was only a few steps into the large restriction circle. He had to let Ma Zhang understand that once he went in, he had to rely on his own strength. It would be difficult to rely on Lei Xingfeng. Lei Xingfeng would at most lead him to avoid the most dangerous places. However, if he encountered a fatal danger, Lei Xingfeng would definitely not help him. He would even take the initiative to dodge. Chapter 747. Mahjong pondered for a long time, but still couldn't come to a conclusion. He also wanted to go in. He knew that the benefits inside were limitless, but the price was too high. If he was unlucky, he might really lose his life. At this moment, his expression was extremely ugly. Lei Xingfeng didn't force him in the end. Instead, he said, "Mahjong, don't be silly. If you go in, the chances of you dying are much higher than the chances of you surviving. Since that's the case, you might as well go back and wait until you're stronger before coming back. If you're dead, then what are you doing?" Mahjong suddenly understood. He said, "All right, then I won't drag you down. I'll leave." Lei Xingfeng said, "You have to find a place to open the door. You have to be far away from the restriction circle. Otherwise, it will hinder you from reaching the place you're going to after opening the door. You know the consequences of going the wrong way." Mahjong was startled. He really didn't understand. He said, "I don't understand. What will happen?" Xian Feng laughed. "That'll make you come out in an unfamiliar place, and you'll get lost." Xian Feng hated getting lost to the core. Mahjong said, I understand. All right, I know a place. When I came here, I was thinking that I could open the door there." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "All right, we'll meet again someday." Mahjong bitterly smiled and said, "All right, we'll meet again someday." He turned around and left. In fact, he was extremely regretful. He was already at the door, but in the end, he didn't go in. Lei Xingfeng didn't move. He watched Mahjong leave step by step. He was still pondering whether or not he could use the mirror realm in the fantasy sky realm. After entering, he would have to find a place to test it. If he couldn't go back, then he would have to be careful in this huge restriction circle. Facing the densely packed islands, Lei Xingfeng didn't dare to enter. He had to carefully observe from the periphery. He felt that his restrictions weren't enough to handle this huge restriction. It was too complex and naturally formed. This was inconceivable because the entire restriction was too complete. He couldn't find a flaw in it. If he could break through this great restriction, Xian Feng believed that his knowledge of restrictions would increase greatly, even to the point that his understanding of restrictions would reach a new height. The effect would be as if he had been reborn. Actually, Xian Feng was standing at the top of a cliff. He had thought that it was the shore, but when he reached the shore, he realized that those islands were all floating in the air, with countless restriction nodes. If one was close enough, they could still be seen, but if one was slightly further away, it would be a blur. With Xian Feng's knowledge of restrictions, he was very clear that once he stepped in, the entire world would change, and it definitely wouldn't be what he saw now. What was inside? It wasn't just treasures. There were probably many, many dangers. Lei Xingfeng was vaguely looking forward to it. He also had a certain amount of fear. However, he would definitely not back down. Just as he was thinking, he saw Mahjong scurrying back. Lei Xingfeng asked curiously, "Why are you back?" Mahjong's face was full of anger. He said, "Someone blocked my way." Lei Xingfeng asked in surprise, "Who?" Immediately after, there was a whistling sound from afar. 3 people were running over at an incredible speed. Lei Xingfeng turned back to look at the restriction. They were just a few steps behind him. He stared at the newcomers and asked, "Who are they?" Mahjong said, "I don't know. They didn't even see me and attacked me. I dodged it. There are 3 of them." Lei Xingfeng already understood. He said, "They're the people who followed us here. They were the people who kept running around the restriction. Mahjong, you can't leave now either." Seeing the 3 of them rushing over, one of them even shouted out in joy, "Haha, we finally found him. Damn it. If there is such a person, we wouldn't have to recklessly charge through the restrictions. Having someone to open up a path for us is better than anything else." The other two laughed. Lei Xingfeng's heart sank. He could hear the malice in their words. In other words, these people didn't have good intentions from the beginning. It was no wonder. This place was abnormally dangerous. With someone in front, they would know a lot of information. This was very advantageous for them. Of course, they didn't care about the person in front. If they could get information and avoid danger, they wouldn't care about the person in front. Lei Xingfeng pulled Ma Zhang and whispered, I said let's go. We will enter the restriction together. Let's wait for a while. I want to see clearly who they are. They are so powerful that they want me to be cannon fodder. The two of them stood beside the restriction. This huge restriction was what Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang relied on. Anyway, if something went wrong, they would turn around and enter the restriction. Even if they entered, what could they do? There couldn't be a restriction master among the three. When the three of them saw Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang standing beside the restriction, they didn't immediately approach. Instead, they stood a few dozen meters away from the two of them. Lei Xingfeng sized up the other party. 2 old men and 1 old woman. 3 people. It was a strange combination. When Lei Xingfeng saw the 3 of them for the first time, he was certain that any one of them was stronger than the 2 of them. If one of them came up to fight, he and Ma Zhang might be able to resist for a while. Whether they could win or not, it was hard to say. They might not be able to win against one of them, but against 3 of them, there was simply no room for struggle. When the 3 of them saw Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang, they all smiled. That kind of feeling was that they were going to eat the 2 of them. Ma Zhang couldn't see through the strength of the 3 of them, but he was very clear that the 3 of them were extremely powerful. He couldn't help but secretly rejoice. When he saw the shadows of the 3 of them, turning around and running was absolutely correct. Otherwise, he would have been caught. In this kind of dangerous place, it was very important to have an expert cannon fodder. However, how many experts were willing to be cannon fodder and a pathfinder? Therefore, force was inevitable. Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang didn't speak. They just looked at each other quietly. The 3 of them had jubilant appearances. One of the old men said, "The 2 of you, nice to meet you." Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang didn't speak. They continued to look at the 3 of them. The old man said, "I'm Dangu. This is Dinger. This is Pokies." Dinger smiled faintly and said, "Nice to meet you." Pokies, who was the auntie, was a rare high-level female cultivator. She looked like an Annie. She said, "The 2 of you about joining us?" Lei Xingfeng said expressionlessly, "Not interested. Let's go our separate ways." Ma Zhang was under great pressure. He couldn't speak, but he nodded fiercely, showing that he agreed with Lei Xingfeng's opinion. Dinger sneered and said, "That's not up to you." This guy was shouting that he wanted to find someone to lead the way, as if he wanted to catch a scapegoat. As soon as he opened his mouth, Lei Xingfeng knew. Lei Xingfeng also sneered and said, "This is a world of seals. What can you do?" It was about to pounce, but Dangu pulled him back. He could also see that the other party wanted to use the seals to escape. Needless to say, the 3 of them were idiots when it came to seals. This journey was really tiring. They didn't reap much, but they consumed an astonishing amount of energy. This was why they had the idea of capturing people to lead the way. They really couldn't bear it. The energy consumption was too great. If they could capture Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang, or force them to lead the way, then they could reduce their losses and save a lot of energy. According to Lei Xingfeng's estimation, the 3 of them were at least high-level monarchs. They might even be peak monarchs. This kind of strength wasn't something he and Ma Zhang could deal with. At this time, Lei Xingfeng already had the idea of retreating. Lei Xingfeng said, "Do you know what's behind me?" Dangu said, "Of course, it's the fantasy sky realm. It's a treasure land for high-level cultivators. It was open some time ago." Lei Xingfeng said, "Don't look at how high your cultivation is. You don't understand anything, yet you dare to enter the fantasy sky realm?" Saying that, he gently pulled Ma Zhang's sleeve and whispered, "Get ready to slip away." Ma Zhang took 2 steps back and reached the edge of the seal. In fact, it was the edge of the cliff. Dangu said, "You understand seals?" The 3 of them became excited. What a joke! High-level cultivators who were proficient in seals were simply rare animals. The biggest reason why Xingfeng was so good to Lei Xingfeng was because Lei Xingfeng was a grandmaster of seals. This kind of talent was too rare. This kind of talent must be won over. But they didn't expect that Lei Xingfeng would go out and completely disappear. Xingfeng specially searched for him and saw the remnants of seals that Lei Xingfeng had arranged. He knew that Lei Xingfeng had a conflict with outsiders. Lei Xingfeng sneered and said, "I understand seals. What does it have to do with you? Let's go." He pulled Ma Zhang's arm and rushed back, crashing into the seal. Dan Gu and the others watched as the two of them flew into the seal. Dan Gu shouted in fright, "Don't go in." Then, the three of them heard a cold snort and a faint voice. "Idiots, this is just entering the seal. There's no danger at all, ha. 3 idiots." Dan Gu shouted angrily. Ding Air roared, "I'm going to kill you 2 bastards." Pokies pointed to the edge of the cliff and said, "Look, look." 2 black lines appeared, extending into the fantasy sky realm along a strange path. These were extremely thin black lines, and at the top of the black lines were 2 tiny black dots. Dan Gu and the others immediately understood that these were the tracks that Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang had moved. But why the 2 of them had become so small and what those black lines were, the 3 of them had no idea. Pokies was bewildered. "What is this?" Dan Gu and Ding Air also didn't know. The 2 of them looked at each other in dismay. After a long time, Dan Gu said, "Hey, they went to a small island." This small island wasn't far from the cliff. There were also some small islands around it. Dan Gu said, "Where can they run to? Let's chase after them." Ding Air also said, "Catch that hateful guy. I want to let him taste my power." Chapter 748. Ancient Pill said, "No, catch them, we can't kill them. We need people who understand restrictions. If we can catch up to them, we'll cooperate as much as possible." Ding Air said, "I don't like that fellow. If we catch him, we'll teach him a lesson first. Then we'll talk about cooperation. If he doesn't cooperate, I'll make him regret it. Daring to be so arrogant in front of us. He's simply acting recklessly." Bakis didn't say any harsh words. She said, "Let's see if we can catch them first. Although this is my first time here, I've heard some masters say that the fantasy sky boundary is very dangerous. However, once one's cultivation reaches a certain level, there will only be surprise, but no danger. If the 3 of us work together, it shouldn't be a problem." Ancient Pill pointed at the small island in front of them and said in surprise, "Look, they're leaving." 2 black lines stretched out, rapidly extending outwards at an incomparably fast speed. Ding Air anxiously said, "If we don't catch up, we won't be able to. Hurry, let's catch up." The 3 of them jumped down the cliff and instantly entered the restriction area. If there were still people on the cliff, they would see 3 black lines extending in different directions. In other words, because the 3 of them were not connected, once they fell into the large restrictive circle, they would be completely separated by the restrictive circle. It would be difficult for them to be together, even if they wanted to. This was also the reason why Lei Xingfeng grabbed Ma Zhang's arm and jumped into the restriction. He understood restrictions, so he naturally knew why this was the case. The moment Ancient Pill, Ding Air, and Bakis entered the restriction, an invisible force separated the 3 of them. Originally, they would have been very careful when entering the restriction. Because they had seen Lei Xingfeng's demonstration, they thought it was just SOSO. But after entering, they immediately regretted it. The reason the 3 of them had joined forces was to work together so that they wouldn't be bullied in the fantasy sky boundary. But they hadn't expected that they would be completely separated as soon as they entered the fantasy sky boundary. Ancient Pill's eyes were filled with confusion. In an instant, the surrounding environment changed. He felt as if he was wrapped in a powerful force and then rushed in an unknown direction. But all around him was a starry sky. He couldn't see his original position anymore. Ding Air roared, but he didn't know that even if he roared, his companions wouldn't be able to hear him. Since they had separated, it was impossible to find his scattered companions in this vast starry sky. Dangu could not help but curse. He now understood Lei Xingfeng's words. This was the fantasy sky realm, and the strength of an individual was simply not worth mentioning. Lei Xingfeng pulled Ma Zhang and looked at the starry sky in shock. A force wrapped around the two of them and pushed them forward quickly. Ma Zhang said, This is the fantasy sky realm. It was hard to believe. Even Lei Xingfeng was aghast. Restrictions could actually be like this. It formed a huge world, an independent world, a world formed by restrictions. This was the fantasy sky realm. Lei Xingfeng suddenly thought that perhaps the outer realm referred to the fantasy sky realm. This world seemed to be the real outer realm. It seemed as if a long time had passed, but also as if it was very fast. This feeling made Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang feel extremely strange. Then, the two of them stepped on a piece of land. Looking around, the surroundings were actually lush, full of forests and weeds. Ma Zhang said, this is a continent. It's not an island. I saw an island on the shore, and it's very small. Is this brought about by restrictions? Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, This place is full of restrictions. However, where there are plants, the original restrictions have been destroyed. In a moment, you will definitely see rocks or deserts or something else, but there are absolutely no plants. Thinking for a while, Xian Feng shook his head. Not necessarily. Everything here is already out of my expectations. There might be many things that I'm not sure about. Maybe it's just plants growing within the restrictions. Woo, let's not care about it. Let's leave quickly. This place isn't safe enough. Thinking of the three inexplicable enemies behind him, Ma Zhang also said, Okay, let's leave. Without having time to check the surroundings, the two of them quickly ran forward. In just a moment, the surrounding forests and weeds rapidly decreased, turning into large patches of shrubs. Lei Xingfeng and Ma Zhang ignored them. The two of them changed from running to flying close to the ground, which was faster. Ma Zhang said, How is it? Lei Xingfeng said, There's a large patch of restrictions in front. He had already seen a large number of restriction notes. Sure enough, the shrubs were also rapidly decreasing, and then there was a patch of weeds. Gradually, even the weeds disappeared, revealing gravel and gravel on the ground. Lei Xingfeng said, Okay, stop. Let me take a look first. Ma Zhang immediately stopped. He was really very obedient now. Whatever Lei Xingfeng said, he would do. He definitely did not dare to disobey. Of course, he did not want to disobey. He already had a clear understanding in his heart. That was, if he relied on Lei Xingfeng, he might be able to survive. If he left Lei Xingfeng, the chances of surviving were very small. The two of them stopped and landed on the ground. Lei Xingfeng squinted his eyes and looked at the restrictions in front of them. In just a moment, Lei Xingfeng said, This place is very clean. There should be experts who searched it. There are no good things here. Let's leave. After saying that, Lei Xingfeng rushed into the restrictions. Ma Zhang followed closely behind. He gradually got used to it and knew how to follow Lei Xingfeng without touching the restrictions. After all, they had walked for so long. If he could not do this, he would be too stupid. As long as they did not touch the restrictions, walking in the restrictions would not be dangerous. Moreover, they would not be confused by the illusions brought by the restrictions. After walking for dozens of minutes, Lei Xingfeng came to the edge. He sighed and said, It's the top of the cliff again. Haha, interesting. He grabbed Ma Zhang's arm and said, Let's go. And Ma Zhang jumped down. Sure enough, a huge force wrapped around the two of them and quickly sent them forward. Ma Zhang muttered, This is convenient. As long as we leave the land, we will be sent away. But where will we be sent to? Lei Xingfeng said, I can't estimate it now. After we go to a few more places, I can roughly calculate where we will be sent to. Well, I can only estimate the approximate location. Ma Zhang could not help but sigh. Lei Xingfeng's strength was not bad, but it was far from the level that Ma Zhang was in awe of. However, Lei Xingfeng's control of restrictions was admirable. Ma Zhang and Lei Xingfeng were simply people from two different worlds. They could no longer see the starting point. Lei Xingfeng's eyes spat out a meter-long silver light, which scared Ma Zhang. He said, What the hell? What happened to your eyes? Lei Xingfeng charged the lightning into his eyes. In an instant, he could see the scene outside the restriction. It was as if he was standing on a cliff and saw countless islands floating in the air. Relying on his eyes, Lei Xingfeng could see the same scene inside the restriction. In other words, he could see through the fantasy sky realm. Suppressing the joy in his heart, Lei Xingfeng said indifferently, "This is my ability. It's nothing," he said lightly. Ma Zhang was speechless. He could not keep pestering Lei Xingfeng. One had to know that he relied on Lei Xingfeng. Even if he saw something he did not understand, he did not dare to force Lei Xingfeng to say. He nodded and said, "Oh, a skill." In his heart, he said, "Are you trying to trick a child? I am an old man." Sigh. Lei Xingfeng said, "We're here." Ma Zhang's surroundings were still blurry. He said, "We're here? Oh, we're here." As he spoke, he suddenly stood on a piece of land. Immediately, he understood that Lei Xingfeng could see it. This was a shocking discovery. Then he understood that this skill was definitely powerful. It could see through the fantasy sky realm. This was a life-saving skill. This piece of land still looked barbaric. The ground was covered with moss. With just a glance, Lei Xingfeng said, "There are no restrictions at all. If you sprinkle some plant seeds or something, this place will turn green." I don't think anyone would be that bored. Ma Zhang said, No restrictions. Does that mean there are no treasures?" Lei Xingfeng said, "Not necessarily. However, the restrictions here are very strange. Wherever there are restrictions, there must be treasures. Without restrictions, even if there are treasures, their value would not be high." Ma Zhang said, "Are there any here?" Lei Xingfeng said, "How would I know?" In fact, he knew that there were some treasures here that were not very good. However, his vision was too good. These treasures did not enter his eyes. However, Lei Xingfeng secretly marked them. He already knew that with his strength, he could use the mirror realm even in this big restriction circle. Therefore, he was now like a mouse that fell directly into a rice jar. There was no danger, only benefits. He planned to use this place as a base. He could come here whenever he wanted. Therefore, the most important task now was not to find treasures, but to explore the entire fantasy sky realm as much as possible. Of course, Lei Xingfeng also knew that this was unrealistic. After all, the entire fantasy sky realm was too big. The key was to find the continents with treasures. After clarifying his mission, Exine Feng was actually very relaxed. With his understanding of restrictions, he definitely wouldn't enter one by mistake. But those practitioners were different. Only a few restriction masters would be able to determine if there was a restriction in front of them or not. As for the practitioners, they would have to touch it themselves, because they wouldn't be able to tell if it was a restriction or a wasteland. Ma Zhang said, "Since there is nothing here, let's continue to look for other places." Lei Xingfeng said, "I have to observe carefully and see if I can grasp the direction. It is too dangerous to be carried away by restrictions." Ma Zhang nodded and said, "Yes, it is not impossible to be brought to a dangerous place. Be careful." Lei Xingfeng sat on the edge of the continent. He had never seen the edge of continent before. Although the continent here was not small, it was easy to see the edge of the continent. He sat down and observed slowly. At the same time, his eyes were constantly swallowing and spitting out silver light. Chapter 749. Slowly, Lei Xingfeng discovered some patterns. However, he still couldn't grasp it and needed further verification. His verification method was very simple. He just had to observe how many continents there were in front of him. If he couldn't see it, then there was nothing he could do. However, after he discovered that he could see through the entire restriction, this difficulty no longer existed. There were a total of 7 continents in front of him. Slightly further away, there were 12 continents. From his current position, if he advanced, he would definitely be dragged along by the restriction. As for which continent he would land on, he could only guess. He recorded it down with the star python record, and then circled the continent he guessed. Only then did he put away the star python record and say, "All right, let's try again and see which continent we can land on." Step out from this point. Before Lei Xingfeng could finish speaking, Ma Zhang stepped out. Lei Xingfeng exclaimed, "Don't! F***CK." Seeing Ma Zhang being dragged out by the restriction, Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but curse out loud. Ma Zhang also reacted. The moment he left the continent, he knew that he had done something extremely stupid. Once he fell into the power of the restriction, Ma Zhang couldn't even struggle. He could only watch as Lei Xingfeng disappeared. Instantly, his surroundings turned into a blur. That kind of despair made Ma Zhang extremely regretful. It was as if he had been possessed. He actually stepped out like that. He still had a trace of hope in his heart. He hoped that Lei Xingfeng would catch up, but his intuition told him that this was almost impossible. Lei Xingfeng watched as Ma Zhang was dragged away by the restriction. His eyes immediately emitted a silver light. Then, he saw a black line rapidly moving forward. It didn't take long for it to reach a small island. Of course, it could also be called a continent. After some calculations, Lei Xingfeng marked the continent and then stepped out. He was immediately wrapped by a force and was instantly pushed out. Very quickly, Lei Xingfeng's feet touched the ground. He immediately opened his eyes. At this moment, he understood that it was inevitable that he would be separated from Ma Zhang. After thinking about it, he didn't want to drag someone along with him. Since he was lost, he didn't want to look for him. Ma Zhang landed on a continent in front, while Lei Xingfeng landed on a continent behind. The difference between the two was huge. With Xian Feng's current understanding of this restriction, he hadn't reached the realm of being able to go wherever he wanted. The only thing he could grasp was the direction. The general direction wouldn't be wrong. He wouldn't go to the back when he wanted to go to the front. As for the front, whether it was to the left or right, whether it was down or up, he wasn't sure yet. With a sigh, Lei Xingfeng directly opened the mirror realm and went back to rest. This was the advantage of Ma Zhang not being around. This way, he could return to the mirror realm without any worries. It was a very good shelter for dangerous explorations. Lei Xingfeng appeared in his courtyard and walked into the wooden shed. With Lei Xingfeng's return, the entire hidden sect's upper echelons would gather in the wooden shed. Even if Lei Xingfeng wasn't around, they would still discuss matters and give orders. This place had become the most important place in the hidden sect. Seeing Lei Xingfeng enter, everyone was relieved. Lei Xingfeng had grown into a true ancestor of the hidden sect. No one would object to his words. "I'm so tired. Fatty, it's time to eat." Lei Xingfeng called out weakly. Someone went to call Jean Depang. Wu Yang smiled and said, "Where did you go? Did you find something good?" Lei Xingfeng said, "I went to the fantasy sky realm. I think that is the real outer realm. There should be countless treasures there, but it is also very dangerous. It is an unimaginably huge restriction circle. It is even more powerful than the one we went through when we went through the heavenly moat." Wu Yang and Gucci were frightened. Everyone had gone through the heavenly moat. If Lei Xingfeng hadn't prepared well and hid all the ordinary people and low-level cultivators in the mirror realm, the hidden sect's vitality would have been completely damaged. It would be difficult for them to recover. Lei Xingfeng took out some things and said, "Master, Ancestral Master, I will leave these in the mirror realm. If anyone needs them, you could distribute them." Among them were a portion of stalagmites and some unknown treasures. Normally, Xian Feng would leave a portion of the treasures he obtained for the secret sect, a portion for Lei Bao and Lei Xian Yao, and a portion for himself. No matter what, he was the strongest and had to be responsible for the growth of the secret sect. In the beginning, it was the secret sect that nurtured him. Now, he had to return the favor to the secret sect. He did not have any thoughts about this and would naturally do it. He had long since treated the secret sect as his home. A large number of things were taken out. Most of them were exquisite and precious treasures. Xian Feng specially peeled off a stalagmite and said, "This is a natural energy crystal that can only be used by peak Dao monarchs and beginner monarchs. Even peak Dao monarchs can barely use it. It's very precious." Before he could finish, the energy crystal that he peeled off the stalagmite quickly melted and disappeared. Wu Yang said in surprise, "How can this be?" Lei Xingfeng smiled bitterly and said, "I forgot. This is the mirror realm. It was absorbed by the mirror realm. It's fine. Let the mirror realm absorb this energy crystal. Don't peel off the stalagmite. When it's time to use it, just let the seal absorb it. Wu Yang said, "Okay, I understand." Jean Depeng brought people over and brought out a large amount of delicious food. Lei Xingfeng felt like he had returned home every time he came back. One of the main reasons was Jean Depeng's food. Every time he ate it, he would feel very happy and relaxed. Thunderstorm said, "A phone, if that outer space is too dangerous, don't go." Lei Xingfeng smiled and said, "Ah Yi, that's impossible. That is my chance. It is also our hidden sect's chance. That place is the key to developing ourselves and the hidden sect." Thunderstorm smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I'm really old. I don't want to see. Forget it. I won't say anything. Be careful." Lei Xingfeng looked around and said, "Where's my little sister?" Thunderstorm said, "Yao Yao is cultivating in seclusion. She needs a long time to cultivate after her cultivation skyrocketed. She went to the big crack. Don't worry, someone will be on guard." Lei Xingfeng nodded and said, "Okay, that's good." After the meal, Lei Xingfeng rested for a while and discussed cultivation with everyone. Lei Xingfeng mainly explained, and everyone asked questions. This included experts like Wu Yang and Guqi. Their current strength was far behind Lei Xingfeng's. Recently, the strength of the hidden sect's cultivators had been rising rapidly. Lei Xingfeng's cultivation method was too advanced. It was as if they were riding an ox cart before, but now they were riding a car. Their cultivation speed had increased by a lot. The overall strength of the hidden sect had increased. Although there was still a gap between them and the top cultivators, those cultivators were the minority after all. Lei Xingfeng adventured everywhere and shared his gains with the hidden sect's cultivators. This also gave him a high prestige in the hidden sect. Now, even Wu Yang had to listen to Lei Xingfeng. Of course, Lei Xingfeng wasn't interested in managing the hidden sect. His interest was in exploring the outside world. That was his path of growth. In the mirror world, Lei Xingfeng had his own personal storage. Of course, Lei Xingfeng would carry the truly precious things with him. Many large materials were left in the mirror world storage. His storage was located under the mirror world. It was very large and there was no tunnel. Everything was directly moved in. After tidying up and cleaning up his hidden land space, he left some things for Thunderstorm and Lei Xingyao. Only then did he leave the mirror world and return to his original location. This continent was still not his target, which was why he quickly came to the border and studied it again. This time, the place he wanted to go to was a flickering light that was different from the other continents. He began to ponder about it, only that he had not truly grasped the rules of the restrictions and could not find the location of the teleportation point. After studying for half a day, Xi and Feng decided to test it out first before doing anything else. With one step, Lei Xingfeng was instantly transported out. When he arrived at the continent, Lei Xingfeng first checked. Sure enough, it was crooked. Following the edge, Lei Xingfeng quickly adjusted his position and found the flickering light. Luckily, he could see it. Other cultivators could only see a sky full of stars. They couldn't see through the illusion formed by the seal. This was Lei Xingfeng's huge advantage. After adjusting himself, Xi and Feng once again took a step forward. It was still not the place he wanted to go, but Lei Xingfeng found that he was already quite close. After a total of 7 tests, finally, on the 8th test, Lei Xingfeng stepped onto the continent he wanted to enter. The moment Lei Xingfeng stepped onto the continent, he opened his eyes and was stunned. Was this the crystal continent? The ground was actually translucent and emitted a strong rainbow light. Lei Xingfeng hurriedly dispersed the lightning in his eyes. What entered his eyes was a crystal continent. There were all kinds of crystals, too many for the eyes to take in. He quickly discovered that the entire continent was covered with seals. The position he was standing at was just a blank spot. If Lei Xingfeng landed and left, he would immediately trigger the seal. In the center of the blank spot were 7 crystal flowers. They were naturally formed. 7 colors, magnificent. What was this? A reward? A reward to enter this continent? Lei Xingfeng stared at the 7 crystal flowers. His heart began to beat violently. He knew that these were definitely treasures, but he didn't recognize them. His knowledge regarding the materials required by high-level cultivators was lacking. Who asked him to advance too quickly? He didn't have the time to learn some knowledge before reaching a high level. Lei Xingfeng didn't know what these 7 crystal flowers were used for. The only thing he knew was that these flowers were definitely not useless. Also, these flowers were extremely beautiful. After thinking for a long time, Lei Xingfeng shook his head. He knew that even if he thought until his brain exploded, he wouldn't know what these flowers were. No matter what, it was better to keep them first. Chapter 750. He took out the wooden box, plucked the crystal flower, and carefully put it into the box. After locking it with a small restriction, he put it away. He used a total of 7 boxes made of ebony. Lei Xingfeng was a little distressed. If it weren't for his special vision, he would have lost a lot of good things when he didn't have enough knowledge. But where could he learn? He knew that he could only rely on himself. He had to build his own material file. Lei Xingfeng knew that if he really wanted to build such a file, he would have to wait until he got out of the fantasy sky realm. When he had some free time, he would organize it. After exploring this place, Lei Xingfeng was sure that this was a rare treasure land. The most precious thing was that no one should have been here before. As for what this crystal flower was, Lei Xingfeng didn't know. But he knew that this thing must be precious. Lei Xingfeng reached out and touched the ground. It was warm and smooth. He wasn't sure what it was. Anyway, it looked like a colorful crystal or colorful glass. It was very beautiful. He wanted to dig up some, but he found that he couldn't collect it. No matter what tool he used, he could only get some powder. If he used a little force, the ground would shatter and turn into powder. It was very fragile. Shaking his head, Lei Xingfeng could only give up for now. He started to observe the restrictions around him. The restrictions here were very complicated. However, as Lei Xingfeng's knowledge grew, his understanding of restrictions was different from before. Plus, he had a pair of eyes that could see through restrictions. He had a deep understanding of the analysis of restrictions and the movement of restriction nodes. This was a large-scale composite illusion array with many offensive arrays, various traps, and restrictions. Lei Xingfeng was really puzzled. This restriction wasn't set up by people, but was naturally formed. This phenomenon puzzled him. How could it be? It was too mysterious. Lei Xingfeng couldn't figure it out after thinking for a long time. He had to accept reality. A path that he had already decided on was a relatively safe path. Xian Feng calculated for half a day and knew that if he walked on this path, he was confident that he wouldn't touch the restriction nodes. In other words, the restriction wouldn't notice anyone inside. Of course, Lei Xingfeng didn't want to disturb the restriction at all. Once the entire restriction was activated, he would hide in the mirror realm immediately. He would only come out after the restriction calmed down. This was the best method that Lei Xingfeng could think of. Xian Feng had always been very cautious in this kind of place. He was very clear that a single mistake would be fatal. Even if he had the mirror world under the effects of the restrictions, he might not be able to return. This kind of thing could happen, so he had to try his best to prevent the restrictions from activating, which became his greatest difficulty. Taking a deep breath, Lei Xingfeng walked into the restriction. He carefully avoided the moving restriction nodes and walked forward bit by bit. According to Lei Xingfeng's analysis, he knew that there was a blank spot not far away. This was where he harvested and where he rested. Around this blank spot, there were restriction nodes. They were moving restriction nodes. It was like a trap. If you couldn't see the restriction nodes, you would inevitably touch them. You didn't need to touch many restriction nodes. As long as you touched 5 or 6 restriction nodes, the entire restriction array would be activated. Therefore, Lei Xingfeng had to make sure that when he entered the blank spot, he wouldn't touch more than 5 restriction nodes. Relying on his pair of magical eyes, Lei Xingfeng circled around and finally found a path that he could enter. It was very complicated, but he could make sure that he wouldn't touch more than 5 restriction nodes. After half an hour, he had even failed twice, forcing him to retreat. Xi and Feng didn't want to take any risks. He had to have complete confidence before continuing. If something went wrong, he would immediately retreat. After all, the restriction nodes in the outer area were much less. Surrounding the empty spots were densely packed restriction nodes that were constantly moving. Although their speed wasn't fast, he could still touch them if he wasn't careful. Finally, he walked into the blank spot. Lei Xingfeng didn't have time to see what was there. He sat down and closed his eyes. He couldn't stop his tears. Not to mention opening his eyes, he couldn't even wipe away his tears. Lei Xingfeng was a little depressed. As long as he entered, he kept charging lightning into his eyes. He didn't dare to stop. Once he stopped, he wouldn't be able to see the restriction nodes. This was definitely the most dangerous thing for him. For more than half an hour, it was like this. He was fine, but his eyes couldn't stand it. If he didn't come in at the last moment, Lei Xingfeng would have already returned to the mirror realm. After resting for 2 hours, the soreness in his eyes improved. Lei Xingfeng still closed his eyes and simply began to cultivate. As he cultivated, Lei Xingfeng was surprised to find that this was a very suitable place for cultivation. The effect was even better than the Great Crack. At his current strength, it didn't matter whether there was lightning or not. Fortunately, this was the fantasy sky realm. It was basically impossible to meet people. This place was too big, so there was no danger in cultivating. An entire day passed. Lei Xingfeng almost forgot that his eyes were crying. In just one day, not only did his cultivation increase a lot, but his eyes also completely recovered. Only then did he open his eyes. It was another flower. There was only one flower. It was actually a black flower. Its shape was very similar to a blooming dahlia. Its black color was suffused with a faint blue brilliance. It was about the size of a wash basin and had a very thin branch. It looked like a chopstick with a flower stuck in it. It was as strange as it could get. Last time, it was 7-colored and there were 7 flowers. This time, there was only one flower. The 7-color flower last time was only the size of a bowl, but this black flower was the size of a wash basin. Lei Xingfeng stared blankly. There was only one thought in his mind. What the hell is this? However, Lei Xingfeng didn't plan on taking it back for Wu Yang and the others to identify. He believed that the people from the secret sect might not know what it was. According to the standards of the cultivation world outside the starry sky, Dao Lord level cultivators were considered the backbone, while Monarch level cultivators were the top. In the fantasy sky realm, Monarch level was the starting point. If one didn't have the strength to enter, it was basically impossible to enter. If one entered, they would be courting death. Lei Xingfeng stood up and took out an ebony box. At the same time, he stuffed the ebony grass inside. The so-called ebony grass was a very elastic grass. It was dark green in color and was placed in a box after being dried. It could be used to prevent objects from colliding with each other. He carefully placed the black flower and then fixed it with a simple seal. Even so, Lei Xingfeng still put the ebony grass inside, afraid of any accidents. On this crystal continent, or rather, on this crystal island, Lei Xingfeng found these strange flowers everywhere. In total, he found more than 200 flowers of various colors. Besides the 7-colored and black flowers, he also found white and mixed colors. The so-called mixed colors meant that the color of a flower wasn't pure. Instead, it was mixed with other colors. He didn't know how it was different from other pure, colored flowers. In the end, Lei Xingfeng didn't have the interest to stay any longer. They were all flowers, and he didn't know what they were used for. He thought that it was better to go somewhere else. Therefore, he walked around 1/3 of the entire crystal island. According to Lei Xingfeng's idea, it wouldn't be a problem if he took everything. As long as he had time, he could slowly explore and eventually take them all away. However, because he didn't know what they were used for, his interest quickly disappeared. When he came to the edge of the crystal island, Lei Xingfeng looked into the distance again. Just as he was about to step out, Lei Xingfeng suddenly retracted his foot. He stared into the distance and saw a black line. Then, another black line. In just a few breaths, Lei Xingfeng actually saw 7 black lines. This meant that there were at least 7 people. After calculating, when he came over, there were 4 people including Ma Zhang, Dangu, Ding-er, and Porkies. This meant that if 4 of them were them, which was almost impossible, then there would be 3 strangers. According to the direction, Lei Xingfeng probably didn't know any of these 7 people. This meant that there were at least 7 experts roaming around, including Ma Zhang and the other 3. Lei Xingfeng didn't want to meet them at all. It wasn't a matter of whether he could win or not, but if he met these guys, the restrictions would definitely be activated. This was much more difficult than dealing with restrictions that were stopped. It was true that those who could establish themselves here were experts, but which of these experts were proficient in restrictions? They couldn't be compared to Lei Xingfeng at all. Lei Xingfeng was alone. He didn't need to activate the restrictions at all. He could quietly eat the most delicious food. He could silently come and silently leave. He could definitely come and go without a trace. This was Lei Xingfeng's true ability. Xian Feng found a relatively safe angle, which was the island with black lines. He had already eliminated all of them. He should be facing an uninhabited island. Only then did he step out, and in an instant, he was sent flying by a wave of energy. Gradually, Lei Xingfeng understood a little of the teleportation rules. It was almost random teleportation. However, he had a certain degree of confidence that he would be teleported to the island he wanted to go to. This time, Lei Xingfeng didn't deliberately want to go to a specific island. He just wanted to go in a direction. As long as he went in this direction, he didn't have any objections. He stepped onto another island. Now, he felt that it was more appropriate to call it an island. After all, it wasn't particularly big and didn't look like a real continent. As long as he wasn't confused by the restrictions on the island, the entire island wouldn't be big. Of course, if he was confused by the restrictions on the island, then it would become a real continent. As far as the eye could see, it would be really difficult to walk to the edge. Landing on the ground, Lei Xingfeng didn't move at all. He knew that perhaps 1 or a few steps would be enough to trigger the restrictions. As long as he didn't move, there wouldn't be any problems. He stood still and then opened his eyes. Chapter 751. A lone giant rock. This wasn't a treasure, but a 10-meter-tall rock, greenish-gray in color. In the middle of it, there was a large hole slightly bigger than a wash basin. In the middle of it, there was a flickering flame floating in the middle of the hole. Xian Feng could see it clearly. This was a strange flame. Lei Xingfeng had seen a lot of strange flames. Most of them were used by him as the spiritual power source for the restrictions. He had consumed a lot of them, and some were given to the secret door. He did not have a lot of strange flames, but this strange flame in front of him was full of spirituality. With just a glance, Lei Xingfeng knew that this strange flame was of excellent quality. After carefully placing the restriction on the strange flame, he directly put it into a jade box. This should be his reward for entering. Of course, this was not man-made, but formed naturally. Every time Lei Xingfeng thought about how this was formed naturally, he could not help but be surprised. He could not understand, even now, how could such a natural treasure be formed. After the strange flame was collected, the boulder collapsed in an instant. It completely shattered into powder and drifted away. After identifying the restrictions around him, Lei Xingfeng's heart trembled. This was an extreme fire restriction. If he did not recognize this restriction, once he touched it, it would definitely be a continent on fire. It would be a continent on fire. He knew in his heart that it was best not to touch this restriction. Once the restriction was activated, even he would be flustered. He would rather give up some treasures than touch the restriction. If the restriction was too abnormal, Lei Xingfeng planned to give up some. He knew about restrictions, and he also recognized restrictions. His understanding of restrictions was very deep. The more he knew that restrictions were not to be trifled with. In the past, he was not afraid of restrictions, but with his understanding of restrictions, Lei Xingfeng's fear of restrictions had gradually deepened. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, Lei Xingfeng was not willing to touch a large-scale restriction. Every continent or island here was basically a large-scale compound restriction. Some compound restrictions would make even Lei Xingfeng dizzy. After carefully observing for a moment, Lei Xingfeng walked into the restriction. He could see the restriction nodes, so he wouldn't touch them. Relying on this convenience, he was able to walk safely. After discovering various kinds of strange flames, Zhang Tai realized that this was indeed a complex restrictive formation mainly based on fire. Each time Lei Xingfeng took away a strange flame, the power of the entire formation would decrease a bit. According to Lei Xingfeng's estimation, even if he took away all the strange flames, these strange flames would recover after a period of time. The restrictive formation on this continent had a mysterious operating rule that Zhang Tai didn't understand. Additionally, the restrictive formation seemed to have an endless cycle. Unless the restriction was completely destroyed, even if only half of it remained, it could still slowly recover. The most peculiar thing was that Lei Xingfeng discovered that the seal could change. As time passed, the entire seal seemed to be evolving bit by bit, becoming stronger and stronger, more and more complete, and its power would also increase. It was a path of treasure hunting and also a path of learning. Lei Xingfeng entered this place and was like a fish in water. His harvest was unimaginable. After about 3 days, Zhang Tai collected more than 10 strange flames. As he went deeper, it was easy to find empty spots. As long as he saw a place with dense restriction nodes, it would be a restriction empty spot. Most of these restriction empty spots had treasures. However, Lei Xingfeng also let go of a few empty spots. It wasn't that he didn't want to go in, but he couldn't find any gaps in the restriction nodes. He simply couldn't go in unless he forced his way in. However, he didn't even think about forcing his way in. That would be courting death. If he could avoid triggering the restriction, he would definitely not do so. This was Xian Feng's current strategy. This would save him a lot of time. Once the restriction was activated, he would need a lot of time to escape, which was disadvantageous to him. The entire seal covered the land. Of course, as long as it wasn't activated, this piece of land was far inferior to a continent. It was basically impossible to run back and forth to every corner, but it was still possible to run to most places. As long as the restriction wasn't activated, this region wouldn't be too big. If the restriction was activated, then this place would become a vast and boundless continent, and there would be no end to it. However, no matter how careful Lei Xingfeng was, he had no way to eliminate the interference of external factors. Just as Lei Xingfeng entered a blank spot and collected a dark blue strange flame, the entire restriction suddenly erupted. Fortunately, he had obtained the strange flame, and the power of the restriction in this region immediately dropped drastically. In just an instant, Lei Xingfeng was standing on a continent steaming with flames. Below his feet was originally a blank spot of the restriction. So even if the restriction erupted, he found that the blank spot under his feet had turned into an island of a few hundred square kilometers, and the island was surrounded by flames. Lei Xingfeng suddenly understood that the restriction had erupted. The soaring flames and the scorching aura were simply suffocating. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but curse. He already understood that it wasn't because he had obtained the strange flame that the restriction erupted, but because someone had activated the restriction. Once the restriction was activated, he would also be affected. Then Lei Xingfeng heard a roar coming from afar. It was the roar of a star beast. At this time, Lei Xingfeng understood that even star beasts would enter here to steal treasures, but their methods were very simple. They would break into the restriction and use their huge bodies and naturally thick skin to forcibly obtain all kinds of treasures. Therefore, it wasn't strange for a star beast to break in. Lei Xingfeng secretly cursed his bad luck, but he didn't care too much. After all, he was proficient in restriction, and he was standing in a safe place, so he just wanted to see how the restriction operated. For the time being, Lei Xingfeng didn't want to leave. If he wanted to leave, it would be very easy. As long as he passed through the mirror realm, he would be able to reach the island he had set off from before. When he exited from the edge, he would go to another continent. It was rare to have the opportunity to see the restriction in action, so he wanted to understand. Slowly, Lei Xingfeng also understood that even if the restriction erupted, the blank spot of the restriction was a safe spot. It might be affected, but it was much safer than being in the restriction. There were quite a lot of these blank spots in the restriction. In other words, as long as you had a certain ability to protect yourself and ran fast enough, you could always find a safe place to hide. This was really interesting. Let's see what Star Beast broke in. If it was a relatively valuable Star Beast, Lei Xingfeng didn't mind adding fuel to the fire. Killing a Star Beast would bring him a lot of benefits, especially if it was a Star Beast that could enter here. It was definitely a Star Beast with extraordinary strength. Lei Xingfeng sat down cross-legged and took out some food and a bottle of Fishman wine. There wasn't much wine left, so Lei Xingfeng only took a small amount to drink. As time passed, the wine's taste became more mellow. After taking a sip of wine, Lei Xingfeng waited quietly. At this time, the power of the restriction was constantly increasing. Lei Xingfeng knew that if he hadn't taken so many mysterious flames, the restriction's flames would be several times more powerful. The flames roared like thunder. Gradually, even though Lei Xingfeng was sitting in a safe spot, the scorching heat was a little unbearable. One could imagine what it felt like to be in the restriction. Faint roars could be heard. There was a hint of pain, and the cries became more urgent. Lei Xingfeng thought, "Idiot, using brute force to break through the restriction. You're courting death." The faster one ran, the more nodes one would hit. The entire restriction's power would be tilted towards moving things. The firepower would be more concentrated and the attacks would be sharper. Anyone who knew a little about restrictions wouldn't do such a thing. The flames turned from red to scarlet, then to bright red. Finally, they began to emit a dazzling blue light. Finally, they turned into blue flames. The temperature was getting better and better. The flames seemed to be alive as they roared. Lei Xingfeng stared at the flames. Silver light flickered in his eyes. He muttered to himself, "It's still lacking. What a terrifying flame." He had already released his true body. However, he didn't expand to dozens of meters. Instead, he let his true body slightly push away the scorching air. He also stopped breathing. Leaning on Lei Yin, he didn't need to breathe. Boom! The entire continent was shaking violently. The flames suddenly rushed a few hundred meters into the sky. It was as if the entire world was burning. Lei Xingfeng couldn't help but exclaim. Anyway, he couldn't set up such a restriction. Its power was too great. It could even be called a terrifying restriction. A huge body appeared in the distance. Lei Xingfeng squinted his eyes. He realized that this astral beast was completely different from the ones he had seen before. The astral beast he had seen before might be considered young, but this astral beast was an adult astral beast. Its body was actually 600 to 700 meters long. Its entire body was wrapped in flames. A faint layer of golden light could be seen protecting its body. Lei Xingfeng suddenly stood up. That astral beast had started to run towards his location. As the number of nodes it hit increased, the flame attacks became more intense. Seeing that astral beast approaching, Lei Xingfeng sneered. His sword seal flew out. At the same time, he revealed his huge true body and prepared for battle. In this world, if the other party was a human, Lei Xingfeng might still have a chance to deal with them. However, this was an astral beast. There was no need to think about anything. You could either escape or fight. There was no third option. When Lei Xingfeng revealed his true body, that astral beast also saw him. Not only did it not leave, but it tried even harder to charge in this direction. Lei Xingfeng knew that it was impossible to reason with astral beasts. Although they were considered an intelligent race, they still acted based on instinct most of the time. With its huge body and super strength, the star beast gradually closed in on them. Lei Xingfeng suddenly released his sword seal. The sword seal flew out like a stream of light. At this moment, the scarlet eyes of the astral beast could be seen. Lei Xingfeng sensed that this astral beast was looking at him with contempt. That was because it realized that Lei Xingfeng's sword seal didn't attack it at all. Instead, it hit the void. How could it know that Lei Xingfeng's sword seal had hit the restriction nodes? You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.